Chapter 796. No one had expected such a sudden scene to occur before their eyes. There was actually someone who dared to stand in front of Yi Guqin at such a critical moment. One should know that the 3 false saints and the 10 sovereigns wanted Yi Guqin dead. Today no one could stop Yi Guqin from falling. It was as if it was destined. However, it was in such an absolute and unbreakable deadlock that they were in. There was actually someone who dared to stand in front of Yi Guqin in the face of a group of experts. What kind of courage did one have to be to do such a thing? Master. Yi Guqin's pupils suddenly shrank. A thin figure in cotton clothes stood in front of him. The figure wasn't very tall, but at this moment, it was like a backbone that supported the sky, blocking Lung Fei's attack. Who else could it be but Feng Manlu? Cough. Feng Manlu retreated a dozen steps as blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Everyone was dumbfounded, especially those who were native to the Saint Origin dynasty. Lightless Sword King Feng Manlu, the legendary sword cultivator of the dynasty. He was born blind, but with his monstrous talent in the sword Dao, he suppressed the entire dynasty. At the top of the Forbidden City, he laughed proudly in the sky. He went against the heavens and killed Xian Wuji, who had just become a sovereign. His sword swept across the dynasty and no one was his match. In everyone's eyes, including Yi Guqin's, their impression of Feng Manlu was that he was a handsome man with an inconspicuous aura and a calm and peaceful expression. He had never been defeated and had never been pushed back. But now, Feng Manlu was pushed back for the first time, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. This was also the first time Yi Guqin saw Feng Manlu injured. After all, no matter how heaven-defying Feng Manlu was, he was only at the 7th level of the Divine Palace realm. It was already good that he could withstand the palm of Lung Fei, who was at the 7th level of the Venerable realm. It was inevitable that he would be injured. Master. You can't. Yi Guqin wanted to go forward, but his chest shook violently and he spat out another mouthful of blood. Su Jianshi pulled Yi Guqin back and said, "Silly brat. Your injuries are too heavy. Don't be reckless." Yi Guqin's injuries were too severe. First, he used the Eye of the Void, which consumed too much of his strength. Even his spiritual sea was on the verge of collapse. Then he was pierced by Situ Hongshua's sword, which severely injured him. At this moment, he didn't have much energy left. But Yi Guqin coughed up blood, his expression terrifyingly cold. He was such a person. No matter how injured he was, or even if he died, he would not be afraid. However, he could not let others die because of him. It was the same for Su Jianshi, and now it was the same for Feng Manlu. Heh. I've already said that I won't let my disciple face everything alone. Be at ease and stand behind me. Feng Manlu wiped the blood off the corner of his mouth, and spoke in a calm tone. It was as if these were just ordinary words and not a matter of life and death. The millions of martial artists watching the battle from afar were all slightly moved by these words. An Xian, stand behind me. How many people would be able to calmly say such words under the pressure of such an expert? This pair of master and disciple is really amazing. Many martial artists of the various dynasties sighed. Uncle Feng. Yi Guqin. Yan Wushuang bit her lips, and the taste of blood filled her mouth. Manlu. Yan Chang'e clenched his fists tightly, his body trembling. If it weren't for the fact that he still had to take care of the thousands of disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, he would have stepped forward and stood with Feng Manlu. But because of his responsibility, he couldn't do so. At this moment, the millions of martial artists present were all focused on the figure in the fluttering cotton robe. Even the 3 false saints who were suppressing the chaotic world demon ape were a little surprised. They didn't expect that there would be someone who would die for Yi Guqin at such a critical moment. A little 7th level divine dwelling dares to step forward? Lung Fei frowned. The other sovereigns also looked at Feng Manlu, as if they were looking at a dead man. In their eyes, a divine dwelling expert was no different from Yi Guqin. They were both ants that could be easily crushed. If you want to kill my disciple, you have to step over my dead body first. Feng Manlu's long hair fluttered in the wind, and sword intent surged from his body. A hurricane seemed to erupt in the surrounding void, piercing through the sky and earth. At this moment, Feng Manlu seemed to have turned into a peerless divine sword. The man was the sword. and the sword was the man. There was no fear in the heart, and the sword was invincible. Man and sword as one reappearing. At the same time, Feng Manlu also activated the power of the flawless divine dwelling in his body, and his aura soared again. Sword light seemed to burst out from his hollow eyes. Kill. Feng Manlu, who had always been calm, had turned into a killing god of the sword in order to protect his disciple. Boom. The battle began again. And this. It was destined to be a desperate battle. Boom. Boom. Lung Fei's lips curved in a sneer, but she didn't make a move. A third-level heaven sovereign from the Tianqing Empire attacked Feng Manlu. Cough. Feng Manlu's body shook, and he was pushed back again. Blood gushed out from the corner of his mouth. He actually blocked it? The Venerable One was also surprised. His palm strike couldn't kill a 7th-level divine dwelling. Man and sword as one. In addition to the transformation of the divine dwelling, he has such strength. Lung Fei was a little surprised. Even so, the outcome was already decided. Let me do it. A 4th heavenly layer venerable from a side branch of the Dongfang family made his move again. His palm turned into a crystallized palm print and collided with Feng Manlu. Boom. Feng Manlu was pushed back again. His spotless clothes were stained with blood, like peach blossoms. All of you deserve to die. Yi Guchen's anger surged to the 9 heavens. The sovereigns took turns to attack as if they were playing a game. Let me see how many palms this 7th-level divine dwelling can take. A 4th-level heaven sovereign from the Starry Sword Pavilion attacked again. Boom. I'll give it a try. Granny Chun from the Heavenly God Sword sect also pulled out a sinister smile and attacked. Puff. Feng Manlu was sent crashing to the ground with a loud bang. All the disciples from the Sword sect's Tower Forest were devastated. Uncle Feng. Yan Wushuang was heartbroken. Yan Chang's eyes were red and his aura surged. Don't attack. If you attack, not only the Sword sect's Tower Forest, but even the Yanyan dynasty will be implicated. Yan Balin pressed on Yan Chang's shoulder. Feng Manlu, who always had a warm smile on his face, was covered in blood as he slowly stood up from the pit. His face was covered in blood, but his expression didn't change at all. No matter how heaven-defying Feng Manlu was, it was already his limit to withstand the attacks of so many sovereigns. He was able to kill Xian Wuji in defiance of the natural order, and was even able to contend against a 2nd heavenly layer venerable expert at the divine dwelling stage. But the 10 sovereigns in front of him were too powerful. They were like 10 mountains that suppressed everything. Forget it. It's too boring. Just kill them. The corner of Lung Fei's mouth twitched. She no longer paid attention to Feng Manlu, who was covered in blood, but grabbed at Yi Guchen and Su Jianshi. Feng Manlu teleported and stood in front of Yi Guchen and the others again. Since you want to die so much, I'll let you die first. Lung Fei's face turned cold when she saw Feng Manlu intervening again. The aura of a 7th-level heaven sovereign erupted and blasted towards Feng Manlu. Master. Yi Guchen's face changed dramatically. Yan Chang'e, Yan Wushuang and the others, including the people of the Saint Origin dynasty, felt their hearts freeze. Could it be that the lightless sword sovereign, who had dominated the dynasty, was going to fall today? Ha ha ha, what joy is there in life, what bitterness is there in death? In my life, I have a close friend, a beloved disciple, Lung Yu, and the sword will song. That's enough. Feng Manlu threw his head back and laughed. He was carefree like a sword immortal. Even though he was covered in blood, it didn't detract from his heroic appearance. I use my sword to open a path for life. With my body as a sacrifice, my sword will cut through the heavens. As his voice faded, the blood vessels in Feng Manlu's body exploded as he sacrificed himself. A boundless sword will overturn the 8 desolates and 9 worlds, breaking through the heavens. The violent waves shook the boundless world. Chapter 797. Feng Manlu was covered in blood. It was as if he had been soaked in a pool of blood. Blood-red flames were burning on the surface of his body. It was the fire of life that Feng Manlu had ignited by burning his qi and blood. As the fire of life surged, Feng Manlu's aura rose once again. 8th heaven of the divine dwelling realm. 9th heaven of the divine dwelling realm. Half-step honorable realm. Manlu, you can't do that. Yen Chang's expression changed when he saw this from afar. He suddenly shouted. He knew what Feng Manlu had used. Blood sacrifice secret technique. Using one's life as a sacrifice to unleash his strongest strength. That was almost the pinnacle of wind-sweeping building, a battle of life and death. After using the blood sacrifice secret technique, Feng Manlu was on the verge of losing his life. Uncle Feng, no. Yen Wushuang let out a heart-wrenching scream. Lord Feng Manlu. All the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest cried out crazily. The people of the Saint Origin dynasty also took a deep breath. While they were shocked, they also felt a sense of desolation and sorrow. The lightless Sword King, Feng Manlu, who had dominated the dynasty for a long time and was extremely talented in the sword Dao, was about to meet his end in such a manner. It was somewhat unbearable. Wind God's single sword, laughing proudly in the sky. Feng Manlu's hair fluttered as endless blood gushed out from his body. A translucent green divine wind sword emerged from Feng Manlu's body. A terrifying sword chi that could slash the heavens and split the void in all directions pierced through the heavens and the earth. Wind mark. The green divine wind sword swept across the void. Endless sword chi exploded in the air, producing a tearing sound. Boom. The shockwave from the collision spread out. Feng Manlu spurted out another mouthful of blood as he retreated. However, he managed to block Lung Fei's attack. Even Lung Fei was surprised. Feng Manlu's aura had reached the half-step honorable realm. It's just a secret technique. Even so, a half-step honorable realm expert is still an ant in my eyes. Xiao Lieshan shook his head slightly, his eyes indifferent. Master. Yi Guchen clenched his fist tightly. He knew that Feng Manlu was sacrificing his life to unleash his strongest strength. Ice God Seal. Concubine Lung made another move. Her jade-like hand pressed down and turned into a giant ice crystal seal, pressing down on Feng Manlu. This was an emperor-level martial art. With Lung Fei's strength at the seventh heaven, one could imagine how powerful it was. Reincarnation Sword Lotus. As Feng Manlu raised his hand, a powerful sword chi gushed out and surged in the void. Finally, it turned into a gigantic golden sword lotus that was thousands of feet tall. A complete 360-leaf reincarnation sword lotus. Boom. The violent collision spread out, dispersing the clouds in the sky. The earth trembled and endless sandstorms surged. In such an extreme collision, Feng Manlu retreated again and spat out a mouthful of blood. The bone-chilling coldness emitted by the ice god seal almost froze Feng Manlu's internal organs. However, Feng Manlu's blood and chi were burning all over his body. His flame of life was burning fiercely, and he actually managed to dispel the chill. Of course, Feng Manlu's life force was also being depleted rapidly. He wouldn't be able to live for much longer. You really are an unkillable ant. Seeing that Feng Manlu was still alive, even Lung Fei frowned slightly. Don't waste any more time. Just kill him, Xiao Lieshan said. The 10 honorables stepped out at the same time. Their auras gushed out and directly suppressed Feng Manlu. Feng Manlu coughed out blood, and all his bones seemed to have been crushed. The 10 honorables attacked together. Just the pressure of their auras alone was enough to cause the flesh and blood of those below the honorable realm to explode. It was already very difficult for Feng Manlu to hold on with the strength of a half-step honorable realm. Master. Yi Guchen was so angry that he spat out another mouthful of blood. His eyes were blood-red, and he glanced at the 10 honorables and the 3 false saints. Starry Sword Pavilion, Dongfang Family, Divine Sword Sect, Sky Star Dynasty. If I, Yi Guchen, don't die today, you will all be destroyed in the future. Yi Guchen's sword demon state had long been calm. There were very few things that could really anger him. However, today at this moment, Yi Guchen was really angry. His anger was so strong that it seemed like it could burn the sky. At the same time, he deeply understood that even though his strength was outstanding among the younger generation, he was still as weak as an ant in the eyes of the overlord forces, the honorables, and the false sacred masters. At this moment, the 10 honorables were like 10 mountains that stood in the sky. Feng Manlu, covered in blood, resisted the pressure of the 10 honorables alone. The bones in his body cracked and shattered inch by inch. Blood flowed out from his skin, and the surface of his skin began to crack. Sigh. Many of the local martial artists of Saint Origin Dynasty couldn't bear to see such a scene. Some of the sword cultivators even turned their heads away with red eyes. Who would have thought that the Sword King, Feng Manlu, would die in such a way? It was a dead end that couldn't be solved. However, Feng Manlu was still unmoved. His iron blood-loyal heart didn't waver. Feng Manlu's sword intent heart traceless, his courage illuminates Kunlun. Disciple, look, it's done. Feng Manlu, who was covered in blood, suddenly opened his mouth. His voice was intermittent and weak. Master. Yi Guchen's body trembled. He felt like he was bidding farewell to his master. This is the last sword that I can teach you. Feng Manlu revealed a blood-stained smile. He used his right hand as a sword and slowly raised it, pointing it at the sky. In this world there is nothing that the edge of the sword can't cut. The brave is fearless, and the edge of the sword is invincible. Feng Manlu raised his head, his black hair fluttering in the wind. An unprecedented and terrifying sword concept spread out from Feng Manlu's body. The surging sword concept could overturn the entire world. The sword chi was so powerful that it could break through the sky. The sword concept far surpassed the union of man and sword. Did Feng Manlu only comprehend the union of man and sword after 10 years of seclusion in the sword sect pagoda? No. It was far more than that. At this moment, Feng Manlu's sword concept spread out. Among the millions of martial artists, the swords in the origin rings of all the sword cultivators began to tremble. The swords in the origin rings of all the sword cultivators seemed to have been summoned. Shortly after, they broke open their origin rings and flew out. What? What is going on? Why did my sword fly out? Mine too. Among the millions of martial artists present, there were at least 200,000 sword cultivators. The swords within these 200,000 cultivators' origin rings all broke through the air at the same time. 1 sword, 2 swords, 3 swords, 3,000 swords, 5,000 swords, 10,000 swords, 100,000 swords. The swords of all the disciples in the sword sect pagoda all soared into the sky. Even the Xianming heavy sword in Yi Guchen's hand broke through the sky uncontrollably. What was even more shocking was that the mortal emperor's sword in Su Jianshi's body, although it did not break through the sky, it was trembling violently as if it had been infected. What was even more shocking was that the emperor's sword between Di Haoyan's eyebrows began to tremble. This simply shocked everyone. All the swords of the sword cultivators present seemed to have been summoned by Feng Manlu's sword concept, and were being used by him. This reaction did not differentiate between friend and foe. Even the swords in the origin rings of some of the 10 sovereigns, such as the sovereigns of the Starry Sword Pavilion, uncontrollably soared into the sky. What a shocking scene! More than 200,000 swords covered the sky and covered the sun as they soared into the sky. At this moment, Feng Manlu, whose clothes were stained with blood, was in the center of these 200,000 swords. This was called 10,000 swords paying homage. Chapter 798. It was hard to imagine such a shocking scene. Feng Manlu stood alone in the sky. He used his right hand as a sword and pointed at the sky. Above the sky, 200,000 long swords circled around his sword finger. They turned into a storm of sword chi that swept across the world. This was the legendary 10,000 sword salute. They saluted Feng Manlu. This scene caused everyone to inhale a mouthful of cold air. The scene of Yi Guchen breaking through the union of man and sword at the top of the Forbidden City was deeply engraved in many people's hearts. However, at this moment, Feng Manlu pointed at the sky and the 10,000 sword salute. This scene was even more shocking than when Yi Guchen controlled the 10,000 swords to break through the sky. Gosh, this is the miracle of swords. What am I seeing? Is it really the 10,000 sword salute? All the martial artists' hearts contracted uncontrollably. Some sword cultivators were about to kneel down before Feng Manlu, as if they were worshipping the sword god. The swords within their origin rings were summoned as they converged within the sword aura storm in the sky. This could it be? Even the 3 false saints who were keeping the chaotic world demonic ape in check had a rare look of surprise on their faces. It's the union of man and heaven. Elder Xinggu's eyes showed a rare trace of seriousness. This is the union of man and heaven. Concubine Lung and the other venerables were also shocked by the scene before them. It could be imagined that with their strength and status, being able to reveal such shock, one could imagine the horror in their hearts. This is the union of man and heaven? Looking at Feng Manlu, who was in the center of the 10,000 sword salute, Yi Guqian was shocked. Feng Manlu had pushed himself to the limit, and finally stepped into the union of man and heaven. At this moment he was the Emperor of Swords, the God of Swords. A terrifying sword concept that resonated with the heavens, and the earth covered the universe and the firmament. This was the legendary third level of the sword truth, the union of man and heaven. If 1 out of 1,000,000 martial artists could comprehend the sword heart illumination, then out of 1,000,000 sword hearts illumination, only one could comprehend the union of man and sword. However, out of 1,000,000 sword hearts illumination, there might not be one who could comprehend the union of man and heaven. This level was too difficult. Monstrous talent, comprehension ability, and fortuitous encounters were all indispensable. Even a false saint like Elder Xinggu had not comprehended the unity of heaven and man. But now, the millions of martial artists present witnessed this with their own eyes. Feng Manlu, who was at the 7th heavenly layer of the divine dwelling realm, and was only at the half-step venerable realm when using a secret technique, had used the unity of heaven and man. One could imagine how shocked he was. At this moment, Feng Manlu's flesh and blood were on the verge of disintegrating. He was unable to withstand the boundless sword intent. Feng Manlu had been in seclusion for 10 years. Although he had reached the pinnacle of one with the sword, and had seen through the profundity of one with the world, he was still unable to comprehend it. However, his cultivation base was not high enough to unleash the unity of heaven and man realm. Even after using the blood sacrifice secret technique to raise his strength to the half-martial highness realm, it was still difficult for him to use it. Thus, Feng Manlu had used his own life as the price to unleash his final sword strike. His skin began to crack, and his tendons and bones were crushed inch by inch. Master! Yi Guqian stared at the scene before him, engraving it deeply in his heart. Wind God, my dearest kin, accompany me as I unleash my final sword strike. Feng Manlu did not care about his own life at all, and the corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile. A long azure sword broke through the air from his body. It was the divine wind sword. At this moment, the divine wind sword was letting out a sorrowful cry, and the trembling sound of the sword tip reverberated between heaven and earth. It was as if it was grieving for its master. Overlooking the universe and shaking the universe, 10,000 swords to break the universe. Sky sword, one and only. Feng Manlu pointed his sword at the sky. As soon as his voice fell, 200,000 swords in the sky gathered together with the divine wind sword as the core. In the end, they turned into a giant sword that was thousands of feet long, and the sword qi emitted from it reached the 9 heavens. It carried the power of resonance between heaven and earth, and swept toward Lung Fei and the other venerables. The ultimate sword strike that was unleashed with the unity of heaven and man realm. It was Sky Sword, one and only. Kill. Feng Manlu spat out a voice that shook the heavens and earth. He pointed his sword finger at Lung Fei and the other venerables. The giant sword that was thousands of feet long swept out. Damn it! Lung Fei and the other venerables' faces changed abruptly. They did not take Feng Manlu's strength seriously. However, at this moment, Feng Manlu was not only using his own strength, but he was also borrowing the power of heaven and earth. The so-called unity of heaven and man realm meant that the sword cultivator resonated with heaven and earth. When the sword was unleashed, it could activate the power of heaven and earth, and its power was thousands of times stronger than the cultivator's own strength. Feng Manlu's realm could not measure the power of this sword strike at all. 10 Desolation Freeze. Great Blazing Divine Palm. Galaxy Sword Technique. Lung Fei and the other venerables roared crazily and unleashed their moves together. In the face of this ultimate move, not to mention them, even a false sage would have to be cautious. The giant sword that was thousands of feet long was formed by the swords of over 200,000 sword cultivators. In addition to the power of heaven and earth. How terrifying! How powerful! How shocking! The wind blew smoke for thousands of miles, and the sword was unleashed from the 9 heavens. The sword swept out, splitting the clouds in the sky and cracking the earth. Boom! Unparalleled sword chi swept out in all directions. The desolate earth collapsed, and thousands of cracks spread out. The power of this sword strike changed the color of heaven and earth. It was earth-shattering. Ah! Some venerables roared angrily in the endless sword chi, as if they were being sliced by thousands of swords. After the giant sword hit Lung Fei and the others, it broke apart and turned back into 200,000 long swords, sweeping out. One could imagine that if someone was in the middle of it, they would definitely die miserably, as if they were being sliced by thousands of swords. The millions of cultivators present all closed their eyes because the fluctuation was too intense. The sword light was too dazzling. In the end, in the explosion of the sword chi and the roars of the venerables, the power of this sword strike finally dissipated slowly. The 200,000 flying swords buzzed and trembled, exploding in all directions and flying back to their respective masters. However, at this moment, none of the sword cultivators paid attention to their flying swords. Their gazes were all looking at the 10 great exalted. The only move of the sky sword was so powerful. Would those powerful venerables be able to withstand it? Not only the bystanders, but even Elder Xinggu and the other 2 false saints frowned slightly as they looked at the center of the violent collision. Even false saint experts like them frowned slightly when they felt the fluctuation of the only move of the sky sword. The power of this sword strike has probably surpassed the peak of the emperor-level sword art. Dongfang Aoyang also frowned as he watched. Master! Yi Guqin was also paying attention. Even in the eyes of Yi Guqin's sword demon, the only move of the sky sword was absolutely powerful. It was almost a perfect ultimate sword strike. However, Yi Guqin was more concerned about the situation in Wind Sweeping Tower. The earth was split open, and thick smoke and dust shrouded the center of the collision. The dust scattered with the wind, and the scene inside was revealed to everyone's eyes. At this moment, all the spectators held their breaths. Their eyes were frozen with endless shock. Chapter 799. A deep valley appeared on the land. That's right. It wasn't a crack, but a huge valley that was hundreds of feet deep, extending to the end of the sky. Feng Manlu's unique heavenly sword had opened up a valley on the ground. Everyone's gaze swept towards the 10 venerables. Everyone's breathing stopped at this moment. This was because the Venerable One, who originally stood in the sky like 10 mountains, had a majestic aura. Now only 4 of them were left. A total of 6 venerables had directly disappeared. No. They didn't disappear, because when the wind blew over, there was a strong smell of blood. The 6 venerables had already turned into countless blood foams under the unique heavenly sword, and the 200,000 long swords, drifting in the void. Everyone was dumbfounded, their bodies stiff. It was as if endless heavenly thunder rumbled in their minds. It made their minds a little dazed. Feng Manlu only had the strength of the 7th level of the divine dwelling, but he had killed 6 venerables with 1 sword. How terrifying was that? It was simply heaven-defying. Even the 3 false saints were dumbfounded. This was especially true for Xingemo, the Grand Emperor of the Sky Star Dynasty. The 2 supremacies of the Sky Star Dynasty had been obliterated by this sword. Among the remaining 4 venerables, there were 2 venerables. Lung Fei and Xiao Lieshan from the Heavenly God Sword sect were still alive. Granny Chun had been cut by 10,000 swords and turned into blood foams. 2 venerables from the Heavenly Star Dynasty were completely annihilated. 2 venerables from the Dongfang family's side branch, and a 4th-level venerables survived. 3 venerables from the Starry Sword Pavilion, and only 1 5th-level venerables survived. But even among the 4 venerables who survived, apart from Lung Fei who was slightly better, the other 3 venerables were covered with countless sword wounds. Their flesh and blood were churning as if they had been put into a meat grinder. At this moment, the 3 venerables' eyes were filled with unprecedented fear. Their arrogance and indifference as venerables had completely disappeared, and only endless fear was left. Even Lung Fei, who was at the 7th-level venerables, still had a trace of fear on her face. Out of the 10 venerables, 6 were killed, 3 were seriously injured, and 1 was injured. What kind of battle record was this? Not to mention that this battle record was created by Feng Manlu, who was only at the 7th layer of the divine dwelling stage. At this moment, millions of martial artists felt their scalps go numb and their hearts tremble. This kind of battle record, this kind of strength, even in the entire South Horizon region, there was no one like him. It could be said that Wind-Sweeping Tower had become a true sword cultivator legend. Although I can also reach the unity of heaven and man realm in the future, it is indeed powerful. Even the arrogant Di Haotian sighed softly when he saw Feng Manlu's unique sky sword. At this moment, everyone's gazes turned towards Feng Manlu. At this moment, Feng Manlu had already fallen from the sky and landed on the ground. He held the cracked divine wind sword with both hands, and stood there quietly. His entire body was covered in blood, as if he had been soaked in it. His head was lowered, and his black hair was stained with blood. Blood dripped from the tip of his nose. Feng Manlu stood there quietly, leaning on his sword like a statue. His life aura was nearly extinguished. "Master!" Yi Guchen's eyes trembled as he shouted. "Uncle Feng Manlu! Lord Feng Manlu!" Yan Chang'e, Yan Wushuang, and all the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest cried out in grief. However, Feng Manlu just lowered his head and did not say a word. It was as if he was dead. Dead! At this moment, many martial artists looked at each other. After the proud and unyielding lightless sword monarch had displayed such a stunning sword move, he had been defeated. In the end he had died. Even so, Feng Manlu was still standing as if he was alive. He would rather die than fall to the ground. At this moment, all the sword cultivators lowered their heads slightly to show respect to the sword monarch. Even those who were not sword cultivators were in awe of him. "Damn it! How dare you kill the honorables of the Heavenly Star Dynasty? I will make sure you die without a complete corpse." The eyes of the Heavenly Star Dynasty's Grand Emperor, Xing Mo, darkened. Every honorable was extremely rare, and Feng Manlu's sword had killed 2 honorables of the Heavenly Star Dynasty. How could Xing Mo not be angry? He pressed his palm down, and his true qi turned into a huge handprint that pressed down on Feng Manlu. Even if Feng Manlu was dead, Xing Mo would make sure that he died without a complete corpse and turn him into a meat patty. "Old man, how dare you!" Yi Guchen let out a long howl. The depleted genuine energy in his body surged again. He stood between Feng Manlu and the genuine energy handprint. Feng Manlu's aura was almost gone, but Yi Guchen would not let Feng Manlu's body be destroyed by Xing Mo. The surrounding sword cultivators also clenched their fists. This was blasphemy to Feng Manlu. "No." Su Jianshi was shocked, and her face turned pale. "Good. Since you want to die so much, I will let you die together." Xing Mo's eyes were cold as he slammed his palm down. This was not the palm of an honorable, but the palm of a pseudo-saint. No one could block it. Is this pair of master and disciple going to die like this? Everyone stared. Today, Feng Manlu and Yi Guchen had thoroughly shaken the hearts of everyone present. It was hard to imagine how powerful this pair of master and disciple would become in the future if they could survive. But unfortunately, heaven was jealous of geniuses. However, at this critical moment, a piercing sword qi suddenly broke through the air and collided with Xing Mo's handprint. With a loud explosion, true qi rippled in all directions. Xing Mo's palm was actually scattered. "Who is it?" Xing Mo's eyes narrowed. Elder Xinggu and Dongfang Aoyang also narrowed their eyes. This sudden turn of events caught everyone off guard. There was actually a mysterious expert who blocked Xing Mo's attack. Everyone stared. A black-clothed middle-aged man appeared in the sky. His gray-white hair fluttered in the wind, and he held a sword in his arms. His aura was as cold as frost, and there were 2 crisscrossing scars on his face. He looked cold and arrogant. Everywhere it passed, sword qi shot into the sky like frost, causing space to distort. His aura was not weaker than that of Elder Xinggu, Xing Mo, and Dongfang Aoyang. It was another pseudo-saint expert. Heavens, another pseudo-saint. Who is this? Is he here to help Yi Guchen? Everyone was in an uproar. However, that was not all. 2 more figures appeared in 2 other parts of the void. One was a beautiful woman in a red palace dress, and she always had a smile on her face. The other was a middle-aged man in a golden robe, and his aura was thick and heavy. Although their auras had not reached the level of a pseudo-saint like the black-clothed swordsman, they were about the same level as Lung Fei. They had reached the 7th level of the honorable realm. The black-clothed swordsman, the beautiful woman in the palace dress, and the man in the golden robe had suddenly appeared. It was a pseudo-saint expert and 2 7th-level honorables. This caused everyone to be stunned. Chapter 800. Honorables were rare, and 7th heaven honorables were even rarer. As for false saints, they were even rarer. However, at this moment, a false saint and 2 7th heavenly layer venerables had suddenly appeared. How could they not be shocked and surprised? You are. Xing Imo frowned slightly. The black-robed swordsman could break his attack with one sword, so he was obviously not weaker than him. But Xing Imo did not remember provoking such an opponent. I'll protect this person. The black-robed swordsman's expression was cold. He held his sword and didn't say much. He looked at Yi Guqin. This false saint expert wants to protect Yi Guqin? All the spectating cultivators were shocked, and their hearts were filled with shock. Since when did Yi Guqin know a false saint expert? Even Yi Guqin looked at the black-robed swordsman in surprise. He had never seen this person before, let alone be friends with him. Moreover, with his strength as a false saint, it was impossible for him to have any relationship with Yi Guqin, who was at the life and death realm. When did the solitary cloud sword saint, Lung Qianhen, who's always been alone, have a relationship with an ant like this? Elder Xinggu glanced deeply at the black-robed swordsman, and he spoke with an indifferent tone. What? Solitary cloud sword saint? He's the famous rogue swordsman who cultivated alone and became a false saint expert. He's called the solitary cloud sword saint. Cries of surprise rang out one after another. He's the solitary cloud sword saint Lung Qianhen? The Sword Dao Alliance had invited him before, but he's too cold and arrogant. He's always alone and disdains to join the Sword Dao Alliance. Kenpo was also slightly surprised as he looked at Lung Qianhen. The Sword Dynasty was a country of sword cultivators in the South Sky region. There were many sword cultivators in the Sword Dao Alliance. Lung Qianhen was also one of the people the Sword Dao Alliance wanted to invite to join. Unfortunately, Lung Qianhen disdained to join them, and would rather cultivate alone. In the South Horizon region, although most of the experts were concentrated in the overlord forces, or the top dynasties. However, there were also a small number of rogue cultivators who cultivated alone. Among them, there was no lack of people who had great opportunities and had great achievements. There were even some who had become saints through independent cultivators. This solitary cloud sword saint, Lung Qianhen, was a rogue false saint sword artist. And you, Red Cloud House Master, could it be that you also want to protect this evil creature like Lung Qianhen? Elder Xinggu turned to look at the beautiful woman in palace attire. The beautiful woman in the palace dress smiled. What about you, Huangfu Dingtao? Are you one of them too? Elder Xinggu frowned and asked in a dignified manner. The golden-robed middle-aged man nodded. Gosh, those two are Red Cloud House Master and Huangfu Dingtao. They are also two very famous rogue cultivators. What is going on? The three of them actually appeared together to protect Yi Guqin. As Elder Xinggu exposed their identities, waves of exclamations sounded out from the surrounding crowd. Because the three of them were very famous among rogue cultivators. They were famous in the South Sky region. However, today they came to protect Yi Guqin. This was puzzling. Even if Lung Qianhen was a swordsman, he might be related to Yi Guqin. However, Red Cloud House Master and Huangfu Dingtao were not sword cultivators at all. They had nothing to do with Yi Guqin and the others. Everyone was extremely puzzled. What is going on? Yi Guqin was also confused. Silly kid, when did you know so many experts? Su Jianshi felt like she had just survived a disaster. Humph. Do you really want to protect this person? He has offended Starry Sword Pavilion, Heavenly God Sword Sect, and my Dongfang family. If you want to interfere, you should think twice. Dongfang Aoyang snorted. The three heard him. Lung Qianhen did not have any expression. He was as cold as ever. Huangfu Dingtao and Red Cloud House Master's faces slightly changed. Lung Qianhen's strength had reached false saint. Even if he had slightly offended overlord forces, They would not push him too far. After all, false saints were still very powerful. However, the two of them were only at the 7th layer of the Venerable Realm. Although they were already very strong, they were not enough to make overlord forces hesitate. We were entrusted by others to do what we were asked to do. He's just a kid in life and death realm. So what if we let him go? Huang Fudingtao's tone softened slightly. Then I must kill him. Do you dare to stop me? Grand Emperor Xingmo said with a cold face. He hated Yi Guqin to the bone. A powerful false saint aura swept out. Red Cloud House Master and Huang Fudingtao were both pushed back. Their faces were somewhat ugly, and they could not help but turn towards Leng Qianhen. Humph. You can try. Leng Qianhen snorted coldly. His body emitted a cold sword qi that seemed to freeze the void. Leng Qianhen, your frost sword Dao is getting more and more refined. Elder Xinggu waved his sleeve, and that frosty sword qi dissipated. Entrusted by others to do what they were asked to do? Who is it that can ask the three of you to help? Dongfang Aoyang said with a doubtful look. He was not afraid of Red Cloud House Master and Huang Fudingtao. However, Leng Qianhen was famous for his cold personality. Moreover, he was a man of his word. With such a false saint in the sword Dao, it would be troublesome for Elder Xinggu and the other two to deal with Yi Guqin. It's been so long. Sure enough, everyone has forgotten about me. At this moment, an old and hoarse voice sounded in the distant sky again. Hearing this voice, Yi Guqin's face suddenly froze, revealing a trace of surprise. Everyone's gazes converged at the same time, with some interest in their eyes. After all, in such a clash of experts, the one who would appear must be an expert like Leng Qianhen. However, to everyone's surprise, the one who appeared was an old man with white hair and beard. He reeked of alcohol, and was holding a wine gourd. Who is this? Everyone was stunned as if they had seen a ghost. Although this old man's aura had also reached the Venerable Realm, it was not particularly powerful. He was about the 1st or 2nd level, far inferior to Red Cloud House Master and Huang Fudingtao. Old drunkard. Yi Guqin said in a low voice. This old man was the old drunkard who he had not seen for a long time. Boy, we meet again. The old drunkard looked at Yi Guqin and smiled. Who is this old man? What's his relationship with Yi Guqin? How could he ask the solitary Cloud Sword Saint to help? All the warriors were dumbfounded. If it was just a venerable, then forget it. However, how could a false saint expert be so easily invited? This time, I've troubled the three of you. I sent a message to so many people, but only the three of you came. TSK, the world is so cold. The old drunkard said to Leng Qianhen and the other two and shook his head. My solitary frost sword was forged by you. I owe you a favor. This time I'll repay it. Leng Qianhen held the solitary frost sword in his arms and said. The other two also nodded slightly. Your forge heaven edge. Elder Xinggu glanced at the old drunkard and frowned after thinking for a moment. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something and his face changed abruptly. What, forge heaven edge? Could it be that forge heaven edge? Xingmo was also stunned. Dongfang Aoyang's expression also froze. When the warriors present heard the three words forge heaven edge, their faces froze at the same time. Then their eyes widened and countless eyes stared at the old drunkard. He's the 8-star forging grandmaster, the famous southern forging saint, Forge Heaven Edge. Chapter 801. Speaking of the South Horizon region's blacksmithing industry, there were two people that couldn't be ignored. Southern Forging Saint, Forging Tianfeng. Beiyan Smith Emperor Master Shao. Back then these two people, one from the south and one from the north, had superb forging skills and were famous throughout the South Horizon region. Later on, both of them became 8-star blacksmiths and their reputations reached the peak. An 8-star Grandmaster Forging Master was able to use a lot of energy. This was because every martial artist, no matter how strong or weak they were, needed a suitable divine weapon and protective gear. Even saints had their own needs. Therefore, the higher the level of a blacksmith, the more popular they were. There were even many supremacies, false saints, and even saints who lowered their status and asked for help from blacksmiths in order to get a suitable weapon. It was also because of this that there was a saying in the South Horizon region: he would rather offend a saint than an 8-star Grandmaster Artificer. This was because if you offended an 8-star blacksmith, he would call a group of saints to beat you up. No one could have imagined that the old man who had suddenly appeared was actually the Southern Forging Saint who had concealed his identity for a long time, Forging Tianfeng. It's really Forging Tianfeng. No wonder he could invite Sword Saint Guyun and the others. After all, he's an 8-star blacksmith. However, Mo Tianfeng seems to have crippled his own hands after losing to Master Xiao. I'm afraid he won't be able to return to the way he was in the past. What does Mo Tianfeng have to do with Yi Guchen? Forging Tianfeng's arrival undoubtedly caused a huge uproar. After all, the Southern Forging Saint was too famous in the South Horizon region. Even if he had been silent for a long time, his reputation still hadn't weakened. The old drunkard is actually the Southern Forging Saint Forging Tianfeng? Yi Guchen was also a little surprised. Although Yi Guchen knew that the old drunkard's identity was probably a little extraordinary, it was difficult to connect the old drunkard who loved drinking and stank of alcohol with the famous Southern Forging Saint in the South Horizon region. Forging Tianfeng, what does this kid have to do with you? Why are you obstructing him? Elder Xinggu's tone was slightly heavy as he spoke. Although Forging Tianfeng's hands were crippled and was no longer the same as before, it was still somewhat terrifying. Moreover, Sword Saint Guyun and the others were there as well. This kid is considered half a disciple of mine, and he has inherited my forging skills. Do you think I should save him? Duan Tianfeng took a sip from his gourd and said. Although he and Yi Guchen had never formally acknowledged each other as master and disciple, they had never addressed each other as master and disciple. Even so, almost all of Mo Tianfeng's smithing art was passed on to Yi Guchen. Even the taboo forging technique, which allowed one to forge a sword with a human soul and cultivate both sword and life, had been passed on to Yi Guchen. To a certain extent, Yi Guchen could be considered half a disciple of Mo Tianfeng. What? Yi Guchen is actually the disciple of the Southern Forging Saint? A single stone raised 1,000 ripples, causing an uproar in all directions. This was an 8-star Grandmaster Blacksmith, a Saint Blacksmith. Back then, many people wanted to take him as their master. Among them, there was no lack of peerless geniuses from overlord-level forces. However, Mo Tianfeng was disdainful. No one expected that he would choose a low-level dynasty's prodigy to inherit his forging skills. That's right, no wonder Yi Guchen is proficient in the art of smithing and even defeated Duanmu Yu from the Duanmu family of the Heavenly Star dynasty. It turns out that he has inherited the Southern Forging Saint's technique. Some people suddenly thought of this. Southern Forging Saint. Heavens, little friend Yi is actually the disciple of the Southern Forging Saint. No wonder he has such a master's letter. It seems like that letter is from the Southern Forging Saint. In the dense crowd, the people from the Gongsun family were also present. Gongsun Yu was trembling with excitement. The letter that Yi Guchen had given him actually belonged to the Southern Forging Saint. So that's how it is. Gongsun Xiaoya's little face was also stunned, and her little mouth was wide open. She finally knew why Yi Guchen was so amazing in the art of smithing. So that's how it is. The people from the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest were also amazed. Yi Guchen could always shock them again and again. Southern Forging Saint. How is this possible? Duanmu Yu, who had been defeated by Yi Guchen in the art of smithing, was a little dumbfounded at this moment. Even his lips were trembling. No wonder he lost to Yi Guchen. Duanmu Yu was only lucky enough to receive a little guidance from Master Xiao. However, Yi Guchen was Mo Tianfeng's disciple. Comparing the two, it would be strange if he could win. It's not wrong to lose to him. Duanmu Yu even felt lucky now that he had the luck to compete with the disciple of the Southern Forging Saint. The faces of Elder Xinggu and the other pseudo-saints also sank. They did not expect that there was such a relationship between Yi Guchen and Mo Tianfeng. It seemed that Mo Tianfeng would not let this matter go easily today. Mo Tianfeng, even if he's your disciple, he'll definitely die today for provoking our forces. Elder Xinggu said in a deep voice. That's right, Mo Tianfeng. You're no longer the same as before. Your hands are crippled, and you're no longer an 8-star Grandmaster blacksmith. Since Master Xiao forced you to live in seclusion back then, you can rest assured and live in seclusion, Xing Mo said coldly. If Mo Tianfeng was at his peak, they would not dare to push him too far. However, the current Mo Tianfeng was no longer the same as before, so there was no need to be too afraid. Mo Tianfeng's drunken face also sank slightly. Indeed, Mo Tianfeng had helped many people in the past, and many experts owed him a favor. However, when he sent the message previously, most of them rejected it. No one was willing to offend the Starry Sword Pavilion, Dongfang family, and other overlord forces for a half-crippled Mo Tianfeng. In the end, only Leng Qianhen and the other two came to repay the favor. This was because the three of them were rogue cultivators and did not have any forces or families, so they were not afraid of the revenge of the overlord forces. So you're determined to kill my disciple? Mo Tianfeng's drunken eyes flashed coldly. Attack. Elder Xinggu and the others did not delay any longer. After taking care of Yi Guqian, they still had to explore the secrets of the fleshly demon fetus, so they did not have time to waste here. Leng Fei and the other 4 sovereigns attacked at the same time. Thank you, Mo Tianfeng said. Zai. The Red Cloud Chamber Master and Huangfu Dingtao sighed slightly, but they still attacked. They fought with Leng Fei and the other 4 sovereigns. Although there were 4 sovereigns on Leng Fei's side, only she was a 7th heaven sovereign. The other 3 were severely injured, so the Red Cloud Chamber Master and Huangfu Dingtao were enough to stop them. Of course, they only stopped them. They did not dare to attack. If they killed Leng Fei and the others, they would completely offend the Starry Sword Pavilion and the Heavenly God Sword sect. You suppress the chaotic world demonic ape for now. The 2 of us will attack, Elder Xinggu said. Dongfang Aoyang nodded slightly and continued to suppress the rampaging chaotic world demonic ape. As for Elder Xinggu and Xing Mo, the 2 of them, they freed up their hands. Mo Tianfeng's old face was also a little solemn. He turned his head and said, Sword Saint Guyun, thank you. I, Leng Qianhen, do not like to owe others favors. After this attack, the favor will be written off, Leng Qianhen said coldly. The old drunkard nodded slightly. Boom. Elder Xinggu reached out his hand and attacked Yi Guqian. With his strength as a false saint, it was really embarrassing for him to fight against Yi Guqian. Whoosh. However, a cold sword chi broke through the air, causing the void to be filled with frost, and blocked Elder Xinggu with a loud bang. Leng Qianhen, do you really want to become enemies with the Starry Sword Pavilion? Elder Xinggu shouted angrily. No one can threaten me, Leng Qianhen, and the Starry Sword Pavilion is no exception. Chapter 802. Leng Qianhen's long gray hair fluttered in the wind. The sword chi around his body was as cold as ice, giving people a feeling of falling into an ice cave. Hearing Leng Qianhen's words, Elder Xinggu's face was as gloomy as water. In the entire South Horizon region, how many people could ignore the majesty of the Starry Sword Pavilion? However, Leng Qianhen was a rogue cultivator who came and went without a trace, plus he had the strength of a false saint. If the Starry Sword Pavilion did not send a saint to deal with him, there really were not many people who could suppress Leng Qianhen. However, the saints of the Starry Sword Pavilion would not casually make a move because of such a matter, and most of the saints were conceited and would not chase after a false saint. Therefore, Leng Qianhen did not have to be too afraid of the Starry Sword Pavilion. Boom. In the void, there were layers of fluctuations. The battle between false saints, even though it was not as intense as the saints who could easily destroy the void, but the fluctuations were very violent, and the sky trembled like a drum. This is really a shocking battle. The surrounding millions of martial artists all retreated to the distance. Looking at the shocking battle between the honorable and false saint, everyone widened their eyes, fearing that they would miss the slightest detail. This kind of battle was really rare in the South Horizon region. Humph, no one can save this little bastard today. Xing Mo stretched out his hand and grabbed at Yi Guqian. Seeing this, Leng Qianhen's eyes flashed with a cold light. The lonely frost sword in his arms shook, and a sword light cut through the void and swept towards Xing Mo. However, with a loud bang, Elder Xinggu raised his hand and formed a seal, bombarding the sword light. Ha! Lung Qianhen, although your strength isn't bad, isn't it a little too whimsical to think that you can fight 2 false saints by yourself? Elder Xinggu sneered. Lung Qianhen frowned slightly. Little bastard, die? When Xing Emo saw this, he continued to reach out with his hand. The space around Yi Guqin began to tremble, and an intense pressure made him feel as if he was being crushed by an ancient mountain. Su Jianshi and the others did the same. How dare you? Mo Tianfeng roared and dashed over in a flash. However, he had crippled his own hands in the past. Coupled with the years of drinking and wasting away, his strength had decreased greatly. Moreover, blacksmiths usually focused on the path of forging, and did not have an advantage in martial arts. I allowed you to act so impudently, because you were once a southern forging saint. However, today this little bastard must die. Xing Emo swept out a hand, directly forcing Heaven Forging Feng back as blood spurted from his mouth. Senior Duan, forget it. Let this Yi Guqin take responsibility for today's matter. Yi Guqin's eyes were cold. You have some backbone, but you still have to die. Xing Emo attacked again. This time, there was really no one who could save Yi Guqin. Chaotic World Demonic Ape, Feng Manlu, Forging Tianfeng. Everyone who could make a move had already made a move. All of their trump cards had been revealed. Unfortunately, Yi Guqin's enemies were too many and too strong. For Yi Guqin, who was only at the life and death threshold, overlord forces were unshakable behemoths. In the end, he still has to die? Looking at Yi Guqin, all the cultivators present lamented in their hearts. They had to admit that they had witnessed an absolutely shocking battle today. And the source of this battle was Yi Guqin, a life and death threshold cultivator. If Yi Guqin didn't die today, his fame in the South Horizon region would be comparable to the 10 great young masters. Unfortunately, many warriors shook their heads. But just as everyone was about to witness Yi Guqin's fall, a delicate sobbing voice resounded in all directions. You're all bad people, big bad people. Shui, or won't allow you to hurt Brother Yi and Sister Su. A slender and petite figure suddenly broke free from Ji Ling and the others' hands and charged towards the center of the battlefield. Don't swear. Ji Ling, Chu Qingqi, and the others turned pale with fright. Shui, or had followed Su Jianshi and the others to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. With her charming appearance, she had become everyone's favorite. All the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest liked this cute girl. But at this moment, even Yan Chang'e and the others were helpless in a battle of this level. They couldn't intervene and change anything. Wouldn't Shui be courting death? However, Shui's speed was unexpectedly fast. Her figure turned into a series of afterimages. A strange scarlet color seeped out from her pair of large, lustrous eyes. Xing Emo had also noticed Shui, but when he saw that it was just a girl in her teens, his face returned to its usual indifference. So many people want to die with you. Little bastard, you can die in peace. Xing Mo's expression was cold. Even though Shui was just a little girl, he had no intention of holding back. In his opinion, his grandson, Xing Hong Crown Prince, was dead. Yi Guqin and everyone related to him would die with Xing Hong Crown Prince. Boom. Xing Emo clenched his hand. Void true energy tumbled and condensed into a crystalline palm print. It grabbed Yi Guqin, Su Jianshi, the little fatty, the divine eagle, and Shui. Clearly, Xing Emo wanted to kill them all. After a loud explosion, the atmosphere fell silent. Even the false saints and venerables who were fighting against each other temporarily separated. If Yi Guqin died, it would be meaningless for them to continue fighting. Is he dead? Everyone stared at the place where the smoke and dust had filled the air with rapt attention. Some even swallowed their saliva. After all, Yi Guqin, a mere life and death chamber martial artist, had brought them too many surprises today. He's finally dead. The innate sword embryo should be returned to its rightful owner. Gu Xiaoyang sneered. Yi Songyue's eyes were calm. Yi Guqin had died, so Gu Xiaoyang naturally became the sole owner of the innate sword embryo. This, Kinpo, Princess Fengxi, and the others were also stunned. They sighed in their hearts. All the disciples in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest felt as if they were struck by 100,000 lightning bolts. Yan Wushuang stood there in a daze as if she had lost her soul. Her beautiful eyes became hollow. Damn it. You. The drunkenness in Duan Tianfeng's eyes disappeared and was replaced by extreme anger. He had finally found a disciple who could inherit the forbidden art, but the disciple died just like that. Oh. Leng Qianhen, you all merely came for nothing today, Elder Ancient Star said with a laugh. Leng Qianhen was indifferent. He had already blocked a pseudo-saint and completed his mission. However, as a Sword Dao pseudo-saint, Leng Qianhen could feel that Yi Guqian was an extremely monstrous Sword Dao genius. It was a pity that he died just like that. In addition, Feng Manlu, whose aura was almost dead, was still standing with his sword. Although Leng Qianhen was late and did not see the unique sky sword, he could still feel the remnant sword intent. If this person doesn't die, I will have one more opponent to spar with in the future. Leng Qianhen lightly shook his head. This pair of master and disciple were both monstrous Sword Dao geniuses. Unfortunately, they died on the same day. Just when everyone thought that the dust had settled, a voice suddenly rang out. Cracks had appeared in the sky at some point in time. It was as if many pitch-black eyes had opened. Strands of scarlet blood dripped down from the cracks. It was like a rain of blood. The heavens opened their eyes and shed tears of blood. It was called Heaven's Cry. Chapter 803. What's going on? Just when everyone thought that Yi Guqian and the others had died at Xing Mo's hands, some people inadvertently raised their heads and suddenly saw many cracks in the sky. Countless scarlet blood flowed down from the pitch-black cracks in space. It looked like countless pairs of pitch-black eyes were shedding tears of blood. Even Elder Xinggu and the others' eyes narrowed. They sensed something very bad. The heavens were weeping blood. Rumble. The crystal palm that was suppressing Yi Guqian and the others suddenly began to tremble. Xing Mo's old face slightly froze. What's going on? Everyone else was also surprised. As a pseudo-saint expert, Xing Mo could kill a supremacy even if he just casually pressed down with his palm, let alone Yi Guqian and the others. But now, under everyone's gaze, the crystal palm violently trembled and cracks spread. Then waves of terrifying sword chi spread out. That sword chi contained both the bloodthirsty Azura intent and the intent of Nirvana extermination. Sword Dao. As a pseudo-saint swordsman, Leng Qianhen was naturally very sensitive to sword intent and sword Dao. At this moment, he sensed a terrifying sword domain from the crystalline handprint. Boom. After a few breaths, the crystal palm suddenly exploded. With a loud bang, an endless sea of blood overturned. That's the sword domain of the Azura sword Dao. Could it be Yi Guqian? No, I feel that the sword domain is even stronger than Yi Guqian's. When they saw the blood-colored sword intent spread out, countless people exclaimed. Because it was the sword domain of the Azura sword Dao, the Azura blood sea. But that was not all. A pitch-black and destructive sword domain superimposed and exploded at the same time, completely destroying the crystal handprint. Everywhere the sword domain passed, all things fell into a deathly silence, plants withered, and all life was extinguished. That's the lifeless sword principle. Leng Qianhen's eyes flashed. The Azura sword Dao and the lifeless sword Dao were both extremely deadly Daos. Under the shocked gazes of the crowd, a peerlessly beautiful figure that could captivate all living beings appeared. Her silvery white hair fluttered in the air like snow, flowing with luster. Her peerless face was as cold as a sculpture. It was so white that it was slightly translucent, but it was flawless. Coupled with her long and narrow blood-red eyes, she looked strangely beautiful. Her snow-white dress accentuated her graceful and perfect devilish curves, making people unable to take their eyes off her. At this moment, this peerless woman who had appeared out of nowhere was stepping on the void with her bare feet. Her silver hair danced in the wind, and her silk dress fluttered in the wind. She was cold and beautiful, and her style was peerless. Could it be the silver-haired little girl from before? Everyone was stunned. They were dumbfounded. Many martial artists' eyes were filled with amazement. Such a stunning woman was rare in the South Horizon region. This is the Heaven's Whale phenomenon? Elder Xinggu, Dongfang Aoyang, and the others exclaimed when they saw the phenomenon in the sky. The heavens whale phenomenon represented great misfortune, great sin, and great terror. It was a type of curse. Of course, if someone with such a phenomenon fully awakened, their strength would be terrifying. Di Haotian, who was standing in the sky, suddenly had a flash of light in his silver eyes. Coldness flashed through his eyes. He was also someone with a phenomenon. Flowers fell from the sky, golden lotuses bloomed from the ground, and dragons roared. This was also the meaning of Di Haotian's self-proclaimed destiny, the true dragon of Haotian. However, the heavens whale phenomenon made the heavens cry. It was an ominous curse that countered Di Haotian. One was blessed by the heavens, while the other made the heavens cry. Shui, Yi Guqin, Su Jianshi, and the others were still alive behind this peerless woman. Hearing Yi Guqin's words, the silver-haired woman turned her head slightly. Her blood-red eyes seemed to contain a sea of blood. Confusion appeared in her cold eyes, as if she didn't know why she had to protect Yi Guqin. It was like an instinct. However, she still turned her head and looked at Xing Mo and the others coldly. This is the heavens whale phenomenon. She's an ominous demoness that will bring disaster. As expected, the people around this vile creature are also sinners. Xing Mo's face was cold. Someone with the heavens whale phenomenon had appeared in the Nantian region and caused a massacre. I didn't expect to see the heavens whale phenomenon. This demoness is ominous and must be killed. Elder Xinggu also spoke. Even Leng Qianhen, the Red Cloud Chamber Master, and the others frowned. Those with the heavens whale phenomenon would be condemned by the masses, and would be immersed in bloodshed for their entire lives. This meant that Shui, would be the enemy of everyone. The surrounding million cultivators all looked at Shui, with extreme fear and terror. It was as if they were looking at a monster. The fear in their eyes was even greater than when they saw the chaotic world demonic ape. How is this possible? Why did Shui, become like this? In the Sword Sect's forest of towers, Ji Ling and the others were in disbelief. Still exposed. Yi Guqin clenched his fists tightly. Shui's identity as the heavens whale demoness was too sensitive. However, in order to save him, Shui had completely exposed her identity. From now on, there would be no way for Shui to survive in this vast world. Kill. Without any hesitation, Elder Xinggu directly attacked. His hand seal pressed down. Lifeless sword Dao, heaven and earth extermination. Shui's voice was cold and indifferent. She raised her jade-like slender hand and endless black sword chi surged out with a terrifying aura. However, her opponent was a false saint. Boom. A loud explosion sounded and Shui was directly pushed back. Blood flowed out of her 7 orifices. After Shui awakened, although the heavens whale phenomenon was powerful, it was obviously not enough for her to fight against a false saint. Elder Xinggu's casual palm strike had severely injured Shui. Shui, that's enough, Yi Guqin said. He would not let anyone die for him again. However, at this moment, the heavens whale phenomenon in the sky seemed to have triggered a change in the flesh demon fetus. The vast flesh demon fetus, which was like an island of flesh and blood, began to wriggle violently. Then, under everyone's shocked gaze, Shui's figure rose into the sky. Although her 7 orifices were bleeding, the flesh demon fetus released endless flesh essence that gathered into a blood-red river and poured into Shui's body. Shui's aura also skyrocketed. Not good, stop her quickly. She might be able to use the power of the flesh demon fetus to completely awaken. Elder Xinggu could not help but exclaim when he saw this scene. The current Shui was only in the initial stages of awakening. She had not fully awakened. However, if she used the power of the flesh demon fetus, she might really be able to fully awaken. At that time, even Elder Xinggu and the others were not confident that they could completely kill her. Kill. Elder Xinggu raised his hand again. Endless true qi gathered and condensed into a sword of stars. This was not a casual suppression like before. Instead, he used a divine ability. If a false saint powerhouse really attacked, how powerful would his power be? Yi Guqin's expression changed abruptly. Even if Shui was in a special state now, she would definitely not be able to block Elder Xinggu's attack. At this moment, a wisp of melodious flute music drifted over. The flute music contained a desolate and sorrowful mood that caused people to be involuntarily immersed in it. However, the flute music was like thunder in the ears of the three false saints. Sword intent? Lung Qianhen's expression changed. Boom. A violent explosion resounded through the sky and earth. The starry sword that Elder Xinggu had transformed into was directly shattered by the sound of the flute. Today, no one can stop Jiru Qianxue from awakening. A faint figure materialized in the void. Chapter 804. It was a middle-aged man in snow-white robes. His robes were whiter than snow. His face was handsome, and his facial features were distinct. However, there was a trace of melancholy between his brows. He held a jade flute in his hand, looking like a melancholy scholar. However, at this moment, no one would think that he was just a scholar who couldn't even truss a chicken. A wisp of flute music was enough to shatter Elder Xinggu's attack. The man who appeared was the master of Bloodthirst House, Xue Yiqing. He was also a false saint expert. Another false saint. Everyone in the distance sucked in a breath of air. The number of false saints they saw today was more than what they had seen in their entire lives. Moreover, this false saint who suddenly appeared seemed to be standing on Yi Guqin's side. Many people looked at Yi Guqin, and their eyes were filled with deep shock. This little life and death chamber martial artist was able to attract so many experts. It was shocking. You are. Elder Xinggu frowned and looked at Xue Yiqing with an unprecedentedly solemn expression. Although they were both in the false saint realm, the man in snow-white robes in front of him gave him a dangerous feeling. This person could threaten his safety. Xing Mo and Dongfang Aoyang, the two false saints, also stood with Elder Xinggu. As for the chaotic world demonic ape, it had already used up all its energy. Its body shrunk back to Blackie, and it fainted in the divine eagle's claws. A very strong sword cultivator. On the other side, Lung Qianhen held his sword and looked at Xue Yiqing with a solemn expression. Although Xue Yiqing was playing the flute music contained sword Dao. Therefore, Xue Yiqing was a sword cultivator with extraordinary strength. This person, when Xue Yiqing's flute music appeared, Yi Guqin immediately reacted and knew Xue Yiqing's identity. He was the master of Bloodthirst House. This was because when he joined Bloodthirst House, he was almost killed by the broken sword old man. In the end, a wisp of flute music drifted over and made the broken sword old man panic. The sound of the flute was similar to the sound of the flute played by the man in front of him. It also contained sword intent. Who are you? Do you know that the Heaven Weeping Witch is a great and auspicious person, a great sinner? She once created a boundless killing calamity. Do you want that tragedy to repeat itself? Xing Mo coldly snorted and angrily rebuked. The Weeping Witch was clearly there to protect Yi Guqin. Xue Yiqing, on the other hand, protected Heaven Weeping Witch. In that case, wouldn't it mean that another false saint had stepped forward to protect Yi Guqin? If that was the case, it would undoubtedly be even more difficult for him to kill Yi Guqin. What does the bloodshed of all living beings have to do with me? Xue Yiqing didn't mind at all and smiled. What is the relationship between Xue and the Tower Lord? Is Xue's real name Jiruk Yanks? Why is the Tower Lord grooming Xue to awaken Heaven's wail? Yi Guqin's mind was filled with questions. Xue Yiqing established the blood listening tower and had her subordinates collect the blood essence of people's hearts to form a blood pool to nourish Xue. And now, the blood-flesh devil fetus had appeared and allowed Xue to absorb the blood essence and completely awaken. What was the meaning behind this? What was Xue's identity? If that's the case, then I'll kill you as well. Elder Xinggu, Xing Mo, and Dongfang Aoyang attacked Xue Yiqing at the same time. Lung Qianhen paused for a moment and didn't make a move. He had only promised Xing Tianfeng to help protect Yi Guqin, but it didn't mean that he would help Xue Yiqing. You overlord forces are still as overbearing as ever. Xue Yiqing smiled when she saw this. A hint of coldness flashed in her eyes. She fastened the jade flute to her waist and raised her left hand. A faint sword Dao spread out, bringing with it a deep emotion. She raised her right hand and a pitch-black and deathly still sword chi spread out. Everywhere it passed, it emitted a boundless killing intent. Left palm of love, right hand of death. As soon as Xue Yiqing's words fell, two sword Dao domains spread out at the same time. This is the sword Dao of love and the sword Dao of death. Lung Qianhen's eyes burst with light. The sword Dao of death and the sword Dao of death were both peerless sword Daos. And the two sword Daos had a feeling of natural suppression. Generally speaking, it was impossible for such diametrically opposite sword Daos to appear on the body of a sword cultivator at the same time, because it was too contradictory. But on Xue Yiqing, the sword Dao of love and the sword Dao of death were integrated very well, like the yin and yang of Tai Chi. These two sword Daos. Are you the sword saint of Snow Knight of the Dark World, Xue Yiqing? When Xue Yiqing displayed the two sword Daos, Elder Xinggu's eyes widened, and he suddenly opened his mouth. As soon as these words came out, the expressions of some people in the audience immediately became sluggish, and a touch of horror immediately surged up. Dark world. He is actually the false saint of the dark world. Dark world, what is the dark world? Although some people showed panic on their faces when they heard the dark world, most of the martial artists were at a loss. Obviously, they had never heard of this term. Oh. As expected of the elder of the Star Universe Sword Pavilion, you are experienced and knowledgeable. Xue Yiqing smiled slightly. However, his moves didn't stop. The two sword Daos in his hands, like the reincarnation of yin and yang, collided with Elder Xinggu and the others. The violent collision waves swept across the sky, and Xue Yiqing was shaken back. But Elder Xinggu and the other two were also shaken back. Xue Yiqing was actually able to withstand the attacks of three false saints of the same level with his own strength. The sword Dao of the Bloodthirst Tower Master is indeed extraordinary. These two sword Daos can be perfectly integrated in his hands, erupting with power that is several times stronger. Yi Guchen's eyes narrowed as he thought to himself. As early as when he heard the flute sound, Yi Guchen knew that the Bloodthirst Tower Master must be an absolute sword Dao expert. Now that he saw it, it was indeed true. Hateful. Elder Xinggu and the others' faces darkened. Xue Yiqing was a well-known figure in the dark world. In particular, these two sword Daos were integrated into one, making his battle strength far beyond that of an ordinary false saint. Xue Yiqing could not defeat the three of them by himself, but it was not a problem for him to contend with them and stall for time. On the other side, Jiru Green Snow was constantly absorbing the flesh and blood essence of the fleshly demon fetus. Gradually, a pair of blood-red wings began to spread behind her. Damn it! Elder Xinggu and the others' faces twitched when they saw this. It was rumored that when the person with the Heaven's Whale vision awakened, blood-red wings would grow behind their back. The more awakened the Heaven's Whale vision, the more wings would be formed. The Heaven's Whale Witch, who had once created endless killing in the South Horizon region, had 8 wings on her back. But it was rumored that the most perfect Heaven's Whale vision was 12 wings. Now that Jiru Green Snow had wings, it meant that she had begun to completely awaken. Then another pair of wings grew, and Jiru Green Snow's aura soared again, turning into a 4-winged witch. Just as Elder Xinggu and the others were enraged, Xue Yiqing's indifferent expression changed slightly. She frowned slightly and looked at the sky. Since when were the people of the dark world able to walk openly in the South Horizon region? A grand, broad, and boundless voice, like the voice of a god, spread throughout the 9 heavens and 10 earths. The pupils of the million martial artists present shrank to the size of a needle at this moment. Chapter 805. When they heard this voice, everyone's first reaction was to kneel down. It was as if this was a kind of rule, a natural law. This voice seemed to resound in everyone's heart, causing everyone to feel a sense of holiness, supremacy, and transcendence. Above the sky, a dazzling brilliance bloomed, like a blazing sun. And in the blazing sun, a hazy figure vaguely appeared. Even though Zhang Xian was unable to see his figure and appearance clearly, he still gave off an urge to worship him, as if he was a deity. That is, what a powerful aura, like a boundless sea, even more powerful than the aura of a false saint. Many martial artists were shocked, revealing unprecedented shock. It was just a hazy figure, but it gave off a more powerful aura and pressure than a false saint. Everyone thought of a certain possibility in their hearts. There was incomparable shock in each other's eyes. Heavenly Tribulation Saint. These 4 simple words were as heavy as Mount Tai. As the top powerhouse of the South Horizon region, a saint was no longer a human, but an almost godlike existence. The reason why an overlord level force was called an overlord level force was because of the existence of a saint. Is that really a saint? Many warriors' hearts beat loudly, looking at the hazy figure wrapped in endless brilliance in the sky. A saint projection. You are the East Flow Sword Saint of the Heavenly God Sword Sect, Wendong Lu. Xue Yiqing's expression was slightly serious. In the face of Elder Xinggu and other false saints, he could be calm. But in the face of a saint, even a false saint like Xue Yiqing with such strength behind her would have to pay attention. Heavenly Tribulation Saints, who had passed the Heavenly Tribulation, had infinite power. Even if it was just a projection, its strength was not something that a false saint could contend with. It's the legendary East Flow Sword Saint of the Heavenly God Sword Sect, Wendong Lu. As Xue Yiqing's words came out, endless uproar surged out like a tide. Wendong Lu was a legendary saint of the Heavenly God Sword Sect. Although they were both sword saints, Lung Qianhen, the solitary cloud sword saint, could only be regarded as a false sword saint. Wendong Lu was a true sword saint. The Heaven Weeping Witch is a sinner, bearing an endless blood calamity. My Heavenly God Sword Sect, as one of the 3 great sects of the South Horizon region, naturally has the obligation to eliminate this calamity before it sprouts. Wendong Lu said indifferently. Although it was just a projection of Wendong Lu, it was extremely powerful. As it stretched out its hand, endless sword qi, attacking the transformed Jiru Qian Xue. Yi Guqin, Su Jianshi, and the others' faces paled. Yi Guqin did not care whether Xue Er was the Heaven Weeping Witch, or someone from the dark world. Xue Qian Qian Xue Qian 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 was Xue Qian 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 Xue Qian 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 of the Qian Qian of Qian 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 with a loud bang. Xue Yiqing was pushed back, blood flowing from the corner of her mouth, injuring a false saint in one move. And this is only a projection of a saint. How powerful is a true saint? Seeing this scene, many martial artists cried out in alarm. The strength of a saint was far beyond their imagination. As expected of a saint. This one has learned. There will be plenty of time in the future. Although Xue Yiqing was pushed back and injured, she was still calm. She grabbed with one hand, and the flesh demon fetus was torn apart by an external force, separating a part of it. Of course, compared to the entire flesh demon fetus, it was only a small part that was separated. Then Xue Yiqing stretched out her hand, and true qi surged out, enveloping Jiru Qian Xue's body and grabbing her. Leave with me. Xue Yiqing knew that a saint's projection had arrived. Jiru Qian Xue couldn't safely absorb the power of the flesh demon fetus. Fortunately, she had awakened 4 wings, and Xue Yiqing had obtained a part of the flesh demon fetus, which was enough to support Jiru Qian Xue's consumption. Jiru Qian Xue instinctively struggled, and at the same time, her beautiful blood-red eyes couldn't help but turn to Yi Guqin. Amidst the coldness, there seemed to be tears faintly appearing. Those were the feelings of Xue Er. Brother! 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 Jiru Qian Xue, who had turned into the Heaven Weeping Witch, opened her red lips and said 3 words intermittently. Although she had completely awakened and transformed, there was still a will of Xue Er in her heart. Xue Er. Yi Guqin murmured in his heart. It had been a long time since he first saw the girl lying in the blood-red lake at the bottom of the 18-blood prison. It was impossible to say that he didn't have any feelings. Xue Er's innocent and bright smile was also deeply engraved in Yi Guqin's heart. When Lotus Village was attacked by the Venerable, Xue Er didn't hesitate to block in front of him, and turned into the Heaven Weeping Witch. However, in the current situation, it was best for Jiru Qian Xue and Xue Yiqing to be together. At least Xue Yiqing wouldn't harm Jiru Qian Xue. Yi Guqin couldn't even protect himself now. If Xue Er continued to stay by his side, she would only be a burden to him. In Jiru Qian Xue's blood-red eyes, there was a fierce struggle. That was the resistance of Xue Er's will. You should rest first. In the current crisis, Xue Yiqing naturally wouldn't let Jiru Qian Xue continue to stay here. He directly knocked Jiru Qian Xue out, and then his figure flashed and crossed the void. You want to leave just like that? One Donglio's projection stretched out his hand and grasped toward Shui Yiqing. The space around Shui Yiqing shook violently. Vaguely, there seemed to be traces of pitch-black spatial cracks spreading out. A saint's control of the power of space was far beyond that of a false saint. If it weren't for the fact that when Donglu was just a projection, the void would have been shattered under this grasp. Cough! Shui Yiqing's body shook, and he was injured again. At the same time, the emotive sword principle and the lifeless sword principle's sword domain spread out at the same time, shaking the void, and his figure broke through the void. One Donglu hesitated for a moment, but he didn't pursue because the main reason for his avatar's projection was not to deal with Shui Yiqing and the Heaven-Weeping Witch, but for the Devil Egg and the Human Sovereign Sword. After Jiru Qianshui's absorption, the flesh devil fetus and the devil egg seemed to be attracted by something, and they wriggled more violently. He was afraid that the thing in the devil egg would soon appear in the world. When Donglu wouldn't leave at this critical moment and missed the opportunity, Elder Xinggu and the other two, seeing that when Donglu didn't pursue, they naturally wouldn't pursue. Watching Jiru Qianshui leave with Shui Yiqing, Yi Guchen's eyes revealed a trace of relief. At least Shui Er wouldn't be dragged down by him. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in Yi Guchen's mind. If you want to see Jiru Qianshui again, come to the dark world in the future. This voice came from Shui Yiqing. The dark world? What kind of place is that? Yi Guchen was also confused about the dark world. However, if he could survive today, Yi Guchen would naturally go to find Shui Er in the future. After all, he was indebted to Shui Er. Moreover, Yi Guchen felt that there must be secrets and secrets behind Shui Er that no one knew. Of course, the premise of all this was that Yi Guchen could survive. However, with the departure of Shui Yiqing and Jiru Qianshui, Yi Guchen and the others almost instantly fell into a desperate situation. No one could stop the projection of the heavenly god sword sex saint. Even Leng Qianhen and the others, who were invited by Duan Tianfeng, couldn't do anything. When the Red Cloud Housemaster and Huangfu Dingtao saw Wen Donglio's projection appear, they immediately stopped and looked on as if they were watching from the sidelines. They could not afford to offend a saint's projection. It's about time to put an end to this. Di Haotian, who had been standing quietly in the void, took a step forward and said lightly. Chapter 806. Previously, Di Haotian had been watching from the sidelines because no experts from the Heavenly God Sword sect had come. The strongest person on Di Haotian's side was only concubine Leng, who was a 7th-level venerable. As for the Starry Universe Sword Pavilion, the collateral branch of the Dongfang family, and the Heavenly Star Dynasty, they all had false saints. Although Di Haotian had extraordinary talent and was a dragon among men, he had not fully grown up. Obviously, it was impossible for him to participate in the battle of the false saint level. Therefore, Di Haotian had been watching from the sidelines, waiting for an opportunity. At the same time, he secretly notified the experts of the Heavenly God Sword sect. With Di Haotian's identity as the Supreme Prince of the Celestial God Sword sect, he had the right to directly contact the saints. Then when Donglu immediately condensed his avatar projection and descended. But now Di Haotian had a saint projection on his side, so he naturally had the confidence to not fear Elder Ancient Star and the others. At that moment, seeing Di Haotian stand out, the expressions of Elder Xinggu and the others turned ugly. Although they had notified the saints in the sect, they had not arrived yet. In addition to killing Yi Guchen, Su Jianshur's Mortal King Sword was also a coveted target. As an immemorial famed sword, 1/3 of the 3 Emperor Sacred Swords, the attractiveness of the Human Sovereign Sword was beyond doubt. This person's sovereign sword is something that our Heavenly God Sword sect's Emperor Hao Tian needs. I hope that everyone will not interfere. Above the sky, when Donglio's projection, wrapped in endless divine light, said. It seemed like a discussion, but it was actually a decision. Di Haotian had an extraordinary position in the Heavenly God Sword sect. Otherwise, the Heavenly God Sword sect would not have allied with other forces to wage war against the Su family for Di Haotian alone. As for Di Haotian, he was born with the Heavenly Emperor Sword. He was also the most likely candidate to gather all three sacred swords and form the Tri-Emperor Sacred Sword. At that time, the Heavenly God Sword sect would possess two famed primordial swords, and their strength would soar once again. Therefore, Di Haotian had to get the human sovereign sword. Elder Xinggu and the others had ugly expressions when they heard Wen Donglio's words. However, their strength was not enough to make Wen Donglu treat them as equals. Even if it was just a projection, they could not compete with him. Everyone fell silent when they saw Di Haotian step forward. Everyone stared at the young man who looked like a god. Although Di Haotian couldn't compare to those venerables and false saints for the time being, Di Haotian still couldn't compare to them. However, no one doubted that if Di Haotian continued to grow, his future achievements would definitely not be inferior to the ancient Star Elder and the other false saint experts present. Su Jianshi and Yi Guqin stood side by side. When Su Jianshi used the Mortal Emperor's sword earlier, she had overdrawn her body and hadn't fully recovered. If she were to use the Mortal Emperor's sword again, the price she would pay would be irreparable. Yi Guqin, on the other hand, was severely injured after a series of battles. Even if his physical body was unparalleled, coupled with the nourishment of the ancient god's blood, it was impossible for him to recover much, especially when he forcibly used the Eye of the Void Vault. His sea of consciousness was almost dried up. In his current state, it was already impossible for him to use this move again. Even at this juncture, Yi Guqin struggled to take a step forward and stood in front of Su Jianshi. He couldn't take a step back or let Su Jianshi face Di Haotian alone. Feudal resistance, what's the point? Di Haotian looked down at Yi Guqin and Su Jianshi like a god looking down on mortals. In his eyes, this feudal resistance was laughable. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Yi Guqin didn't want to waste words and spoke coldly. Silly boy. Su Jianshi wanted to say something, but Yi Guqin grabbed her hand. Don't say anything. Stand behind me. Yi Guqin interrupted Su Jianshi. Su Jianshi bit her lip until blood seeped out. She couldn't help but hold Yi Guqin's hand. Indeed, at this point, any words were superfluous. She and Yi Guqin were willing to sacrifice their lives for each other. Even if they died, they would do it together. At this moment, Su Jianshi's eyes shone with unprecedented light as she looked at Yi Guqin's blood-stained face with boundless affection. Everyone who saw this scene sighed inwardly. But now no one could save this pair. Even Mo Tianfeng couldn't let Leng Qianhen take action. The deterrence of a saint was too great. Even a projection wasn't something a false saint could contend against. How foolish is love. Di Haotian's silver eyes were filled with indifference when he saw this. Di Haotian didn't have any human emotions. He was as cold as the heavens. His only obsession was to obtain the Tri-Emperor Sacred Sword and become stronger. Di Haotian, you really don't understand human emotions because you're not human. If you were, why would you do such a cruel thing? Su Jianshi's eyes were bloodshot as she glared at Di Haotian with boundless hatred. If it wasn't for Di Haotian, the Su clan wouldn't have perished. If it wasn't for Di Haotian, her father's body wouldn't have been destroyed. Only a weak primordial spirit was left sleeping in the soul-accumulating coffin. If it wasn't for Di Haotian, Lotus Village's Dragon Abyss Village Chief, Uncle Gui Fu, and the other villagers wouldn't have died so tragically. The source of the Su clan's tragedy was Di Haotian. Di Haotian remained indifferent in the face of Su Jianshi's cries. However, he suddenly said, "Since that's the case, I've thought of a game. You're Yi Guqin, right? If you can take 3 moves from me, I'll give up on Su Jianshi." Di Haotian said indifferently. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone's eyes fell on Yi Guqin. Take 3 moves from Di Haotian. Not to mention Yi Guqin, who was only at Life and Death Chamber, even Gu Xiaoyang, who was also one of the top 10 young masters, wouldn't be able to take 3 moves from Di Haotian easily. Moreover, Yi Guqin was currently heavily injured. Not to mention 3 moves, he wouldn't even be able to take 1 move from Di Haotian. This is equivalent to toying with Yi Guqin. Some cultivators shook their heads. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Di Haotian was playing a game. He wanted to break through Su Jianshi's mental defenses. At that time, it would be easier to refine the human emperor sword from her. Come. Yi Guchen glanced at Di Haotian and took a step forward. It wasn't that Yi Guchen believed Di Haotian's words. He wasn't that naive. It was just that he didn't want Su Jianshi to face Di Haotian. If possible, Yi Guchen would do his best to injure Di Haotian and give Su Jianshi a chance to live. Don't, foolish kid. Su Jianshi's expression changed. If you believe me, then leave it to me. Yi Guchen's gaze was firm as he pushed Su Jianshi's hand away. Ah, how foolish. Not far away, Gu Xiaoyang shook his head and sneered. Yi Guchen had made him lose face. He was naturally happy to see Yi Guchen fall. On the other hand, Yi Songyue looked at Yi Guchen indifferently. Although Yi Guchen's cultivation was not worth mentioning in her eyes, his indomitable spirit and unyielding spirit touched Yi Songyue slightly. Heh! Seeing Yi Guchen step forward, Di Haotian faintly smiled. He slowly raised his hand and a heaven-shaking dragon roar echoed. At the same time, a terrifying aura emitted from Di Haotian's body. His cultivation had reached the 7th level of the Divine Palace. Chapter 807. 7th Heavens of the Divine Palace. When Di Haotian's cultivation was completely revealed, everyone was dumbfounded. The 7th Heavens of the Divine Palace didn't seem like much in front of sovereigns and pseudo-saints. But one must know how old Di Haotian was. He was only 20 years old. Generally, the heaven prides of the top empires were only at the heaven and earth spiritual bridge stage at his age. Even those grade 7 heaven prides weren't much better than him. Even Gu Xiaoyang was only at the 3rd heavens of the Divine Palace stage, which was 4 levels lower. In ordinary low-level empires, the strongest experts who had cultivated for decades were only at the 9th heavens of the Divine Palace stage. In other words, Di Haotian's strength was no weaker than the Yuan Master, the War Emperor and other top experts of the Saint Origin dynasty. What kind of monstrous talent was that? Is that the talent of a grade 10 heaven's pride? Extreme shock filled the eyes of all the cultivators. Such talent had refreshed their understanding of cultivation. What was more terrifying was that Di Haotian had only revealed his cultivation level. Cultivation level and strength weren't completely equal. Take Yi Guchen for example. Although his strength was at the life and death threshold, it was enough to compete with heaven and earth spiritual bridge experts. Although Di Haotian was only at the 7th heavens of the Divine Palace stage, who knew how strong his true strength was? 7th heavens of the Divine Palace stage. Yi Guchen frowned. Di Haotian's cultivation level had indeed exceeded his imagination. A grade 10 heavens pride was indeed the darling of the heavens. Such a cultivation level at such a young age was rarely seen in the South Horizon region. Su Jianshi's face turned slightly pale. Di Haotian was too strong. So strong that it made one despair. This was a competition with no suspense at all. The outcome is obvious. When Yi Guchen falls, I will take back the innate sword embryo, Gu Xiaoyang thought to himself. With Di Haotian's help he didn't need to do anything. Is this Di Haotian's strength? Even Yi Songyue, who was usually as cold as frost, couldn't help but be shocked after seeing Di Haotian's strength. Although she was a famous grade 8 heavens pride of the Misty Sword Pavilion, there was still a huge gap between her and Di Haotian. Yi Guchen's perseverance and temperament surprised Yi Songyue. However, Yi Songyue did not think that Yi Guchen had any chance of winning against Di Haotian. How is this possible? How did Di Haotian cultivate? All the disciples of the Sword Sect's pagoda forest paled. Yin Wushuang's delicate body swayed. The millions of warriors present were shocked by the talent and strength that Di Haotian had displayed. This pact of 3 moves was destined to be a game of cat and mouse. Are you afraid? Heavenly flowers fell from the sky and golden lotuses sprouted from the ground. Di Haotian stood there, releasing endless divine light. At this moment, the might that he released was somewhat like that of a saint. Even a true saint would not be able to make me feel fear. If you want to fight, then I'll fight you to the end. Yi Guchen had no fear on his face and his aura surged. Even if he was seriously injured. Even if everyone thought that this was a hopeless battle. However, Yi Guchen's heart did not waver in the slightest. This was because as a swordsman, this was the heart of a powerhouse. The courage of an ant. If this is the case, then I'll let you know. What does it mean? Heaven cannot be defied. Di Haotian's voice was vast, and it spread throughout the 9 heavens and 10 lands. He did not use his sword. Instead, he used his fingers as a sword and slowly raised his hand. With a loud bang, endless golden sword chi soared into the sky and turned into a dragon's roar that shook the heavens. In front of everyone's shocked eyes, the golden sword chi gathered into golden giant dragons that roared and shook the 9 heavens. The peerless true dragon sword principle. It's the peerless sword principle. No one was surprised that Di Haotian could comprehend the peerless sword principle. However, the true dragon sword principle that Di Haotian displayed was too powerful. Even among the peerless sword principles, it was one of the best. The dragon was the symbol of an emperor. It represented Di Haotian's identity as the true dragon. True dragon sword principle, divine dragon's 7 swords. Di Haotian pointed his finger, and the true dragon sword chi soared into the sky. 7 golden dragon swords soared into the sky and condensed into 7 true dragon sword shadows. They stirred up endless wind and clouds in the sky and slashed toward Yi Guchen. That kind of fluctuation was extremely powerful. 7 true dragon sword shadows slashed down from the sky one after another. Each of the true dragon sword shadows had the power of an emperor-level sword art. When the 7 true dragon sword shadows fell, it was comparable to the power of 7 emperor-level martial arts stacked together. Too powerful. All the martial artists watching the battle gasped. Even Gu Xiaoyang's face was solemn. An ordinary divine-dwelling realm expert would not be able to withstand this move. Yi Guchen's eyes were cold when he saw the 7 true dragon swords coming toward him. A terrifying sword concept swept out in all directions. Man and sword as one. At the same time, Yi Guchen used the Xianming heavy sword and completely squeezed out what little true qi was left in his body. A terrifying and sharp sword qi that seemed to be able to break through all barriers condensed on the sword blade. 9 Dugu swords. Breaking sword style. Yi Guchen did not hold back. He also erupted with all his strength and trump cards. The man and sword as one combined with the 9 Dugu swords breaking sword style. The sword chi seemed to be able to penetrate the void. That's man and sword as one. And Yi Guchen's sword technique is almost flawless. However, when Yi Guchen used his own technique, it also caused a wave of shock. After all, to comprehend the man and sword as one at such a young age, it could be said that he was a monstrous sword Dao genius. That sword technique. Leng Qianhen, who was standing high in the sky, was also surprised when he saw Yi Guchen use the 9 Dugu swords. He did not know that it was Yi Guchen's original sword technique. He only thought that the sword technique was almost perfect. When Di Haotian saw Yi Guchen's technique again, there was not the slightest fluctuation in his silver eyes. Boom! Violent sword chi collided, causing a rumble in all directions. Terrifying shockwaves swept up endless smoke and dust. Yi Guchen had once used the man and sword style to defeat Gu Zun, who had obtained the 7 kills Saber Saint's inheritance. However, Di Haotian was clearly a stronger opponent than Gu Zun. Pfft! The sound of someone vomiting blood came from the smoke and dust. Yi Guchen's figure was sent flying, blood splattering like rain. Silly boy. Su Jianshir's expression changed drastically. She flashed out and caught Yi Guchen. On the other side, when the shockwaves from the collision reached Di Haotian, a layer of golden dragon chi appeared on the surface of his body and blocked the shockwaves. Di Haotian stood with his hands behind his back. He did not move at all. Even the corner of his clothes did not flutter. He was like a god that stood above the 9 heavens, unmoving and unwavering. Everyone's eyes were filled with shock. Was there even a need to fight? It was not an equal battle at all. Yi Guchen coughed up blood from the corner of his mouth. His already red clothes were dyed dark red. There was a huge sword wound on his chest. If it wasn't for Yi Guchen's strong physical body, that move would have killed him. The difference was too great. Chapter 808. It wasn't because Yi Guchen's one with the sword and Dugu's 9 swords weren't strong. It was because the difference in cultivation between him and Di Haotian was too great. Di Haotian also used the true dragon sword Dao and the 7 swords of the dragon god. Therefore, Yi Guchen didn't have an advantage in any aspect. To be honest, it was a miracle that Yi Guchen was still alive. You're not dead. Di Haotian glanced at Yi Guchen. He was a little surprised. Although what he used wasn't his strongest technique, it wasn't weak either. In the younger generation of the South Horizon region, there weren't many who could make Di Haotian fight seriously. Cough. Yi Guchen's mouth was bleeding profusely. Di Haotian's one move had heavily injured him. No, silly boy, that's enough. Su Jianshi hugged Yi Guchen tightly as tears fell from her eyes. I can still fight. Yi Guchen got up from Su Jianshi's embrace. His body was trembling and covered in blood. As long as he could survive these 3 moves, Di Haotian might really let Su Jianshi go if he didn't want to lose face. At the very least, Su Jianshi could survive this crisis. Therefore, no matter what, Yi Guchen had to survive these 3 moves. No! Su Jianshi grabbed Yi Guchen's sleeve and bit her lip until it bled. Trust me. Yi Guchen grabbed Su Jianshi's hand and pushed it away. He straightened his back and continued to face Di Haotian. This is the true Dragon Haotian's technique? Again. Yi Guchen spat out a mouthful of blood. His bloodied arm gripped the Xianming heavy sword tightly. Even the body of the indestructible mysterious underworld heavy sword started to crack slightly. Looking at Yi Guchen, who was covered in blood but still unmoving, everyone felt a chill run down their spines. All the martial artists present fell silent. Even those who had lost to Yi Guchen, such as Yu Wentian and Gongming Ba, were silent. They couldn't say anything to mock him. If they were in Di Haotian's shoes, they probably wouldn't even have the courage to draw their swords. At this moment, even though everyone believed that Yi Guchen would definitely die at Di Haotian's hands, his unyielding swordsman's heart won the respect and admiration of all the warriors. Yi Songyue was silent for a moment before she muttered. If this person doesn't die, then he might be one of the top 10 young masters of the South Horizon region in the future. Oh, is that so? Unfortunately, the dead will not become one of the 10 great young masters. Gu Xiaoyang sneered. He had no respect for Yi Guchen. In his eyes, this was like striking a rock with an egg, overestimating one's own capabilities. It is indeed beyond my expectations that you were able to withstand my attack, but it ends here, Di Haotian said calmly. He raised his hand again and pointed a finger at the sky. Heavens will alone clear sky, true dragon. This move? Heaven's judgment. As soon as Di Haotian finished speaking, endless spirit chi surged in the sky and the clouds changed. It was as if the power of heaven and earth had been triggered. A terrifying sword chi surged in the sky and finally condensed into a translucent giant sword that was 100 feet long under everyone's shocked gazes. The giant sword seemed to be the sword of judgment condensed by heaven. It was extremely powerful and shook the world. Fall. Di Haotian pointed a finger downwards. The giant sword that was 100 feet long fell towards Yi Guchen with a terrifying aura that could split the wind and clouds. The sword was unstoppable, as if it was the judgment of heaven's wrath. It's over, Gu Xiaoyang said calmly. Yi Songyue also shook her head secretly. Even she felt that she couldn't block heaven's judgment, let alone Yi Guchen, who was severely injured. Thousands of gazes gathered on Yi Guchen. This was the monstrous sword principal genius who rose from a low-level dynasty and amazed everyone. Was he really going to die at Di Haotian's hands today? Looking at the giant sword that was falling from the sky, Yi Guchen's blood-stained face was unprecedentedly calm. After all, he wasn't a teenager in his heart, but a supreme sword demon who had dominated Jianghu for 40 years. Yi Guchen didn't have any fear of death. The closer he was to death, the calmer Yi Guchen became. He held the sword with both hands. Because of his serious injuries, his hands were weak and trembling slightly. However, the sword principle will supported Yi Guchen. An indescribably terrifying aura was emitted from Yi Guchen's severely injured body. It was an unyielding will that was willing to risk everything and burn everything. It was an invincible spirit that wanted to crush heaven and earth. Yi Guchen squeezed out the last bit of genuine qi in his body. Even his exhausted chaotic consciousness was trembling violently, as if it couldn't bear the mental pressure. The boundless sea of qi in his dantian was also pushed to the extreme, showing signs of collapse. 10,000 deities tribulation. Third move. Yi Guchen's tone was as cold as ice, but it contained a kind of unrepentant momentum that moved everyone. Buddha. Demon. Tears. Yi Guqian drew his sword and soared into the sky. He roared into the sky for 30,000 miles, shocking the world with his sword. The third move of 10,000 deities tribulation, Buddha Demon's Tears, final appearance. An unimaginably terrifying sword chi rose from Yi Guqian's body. He slashed out with his sword, and suddenly, two towering figures appeared in the void. One was covered in golden light, like a Buddha in the world, and also like a great sun, suppressing the demons of heaven and earth. The other was pitch black, covered in dense demonic chi, like a heaven-defying great demon, demonizing the world and causing the gods to fall. Just as everyone's hair stood on end, and they sucked in a breath of cold air, because of the scene that appeared in the void, tears fell from the eyes of the Buddha and the great demon at the same time. 2 drops of tears gathered together, and fell on the blade of Yi Guqian's sword. This sword was so powerful that it made the Buddha and the demon cry. Even the sturdy Xianming heavy sword almost couldn't withstand the power of this sword move. When the sword was slashed out, the Xianming heavy sword shattered at the same time. Yi Guqian let out a clear roar and went against the sky, slashing at the sword of judgment. Boom! It was as if 100 nuclear bombs had exploded, and a glaring brilliance burst out. It was the most extreme collision, and the huge sword chi rippled out in all directions. The earth seemed to have been turned upside down, and layers of smoke rose. The sword chi broke the clouds and scattered them. The deafening noise only gradually subsided after a few dozen breaths. Everyone couldn't wait to look over. In that intense shock, Yi Guqian's body fell from the sky like a bird with broken wings, and blood splattered everywhere. On the other side, Di Haotian stood in the sky, and a dragon chi shadow appeared on the surface of his body. The golden dragon chi shadow coiled and protected Di Haotian's body within it. The terrifying shock wave, and the Buddha's tear sword chi landed on the golden dragon chi, causing it to tremble violently. That's one of Di Haotian's 3 great special abilities, the innate dragon emperor's chi. Some people exclaimed with their eyes wide open. Di Haotian had 3 great special abilities, and the golden dragon chi that appeared on the surface of his body. It was one of his special abilities, the innate dragon emperor's chi. With the innate dragon emperor's chi protecting him, most attacks couldn't hurt Di Haotian. The terrifying sword chi of the Buddha's tear struck the innate dragon emperor's chi, causing it to tremble violently. But in the end, it didn't break through. This time it's really over. Everyone thought to themselves. Chapter 809. The millions of martial artists were stunned as they watched the shocking collision of sword moves. Yi Guqian's sword move was so powerful that it exceeded everyone's expectations. They could not imagine how Yi Guqian, who was only at the life and death realm, could perform such a terrifying sword move. What a powerful sword move. What a pity. He's too weak. Lung Qianhen, who was standing high in the sky, held his sword. His cold eyes were filled with surprise. A sword move that could make him, the solitary cloud sword saint, exclaim in admiration was obviously extraordinary. Unfortunately, Yi Guqian's realm was too far away from Di Haotian's. After the violent roar, the world gradually calmed down. Yi Guqian half knelt in a pool of blood. Even his long black hair was soaked in blood and dyed dark red. He held the hilt of the Xianming heavy sword in his hand. The sword body had already shattered. It was hard to imagine that the Xianming heavy sword, which was strong enough to be used as a shield, could not withstand the demon Buddha's tears and shattered. At this moment, Yi Guqian was forcefully supporting his body. The shattered Xianming heavy sword seemed to indicate that Yi Guqian was on the verge of death. In the sky, Di Haotian stood calmly. The golden dragon formed by the innate dragon emperor chi raised its head, and let out a dragon roar. This is really surprising, Di Haotian muttered to himself. The Thousand Gods Tribulation was a supreme sword skill manifested from the Thunder Calamity sword. Even with Di Haotian's experience, the demon Buddha's tears had surprised him. If we were in the same realm, your sword move might be able to threaten my protective dragon emperor chi. Unfortunately, Di Haotian shook his head slightly. Thus, when everyone saw this scene, they knew that it was over. Yi Guqian's sword move with all his might could not break through Di Haotian's innate dragon emperor chi. It could not even break through the protective dragon Emperor Qi, let alone hurt Di Haotian. Not to mention, Di Haotian had 3 gifted superpowers. He had yet to reveal his true strength. He didn't even take out the Emperor's sword in his body. This was a completely unequal battle. Silly boy. Su Jianshi flashed and hugged the bloodied Yi Guqin. Her tears fell like rain. What was heart-wrenching? What is heart-wrenching pain? Cough. With a violent cough, Yi Guqin's body trembled slightly. Yi Guqin is still alive? The onlookers' eyes almost popped out of their sockets when they saw this scene. Yi Guqin was still alive after such a powerful collision? Many cultivators looked at each other and saw the horror in each other's eyes. Regardless of the result today, just the fact that Yi Guqin could survive 2 of Di Haotian's moves while being in the life and death chamber was enough to make him famous in the South Horizon region. He's really lucky. Gu Xiaoyang's face darkened slightly. He didn't expect Yi Guqin to still be alive. There's a kind of willpower supporting him. Yi Songyue said after a moment of silence. No matter how strong a willpower is, it can't withstand a single blow from strength. Gu Xiaoyang shook his head. Everyone was infected by Yi Guqin's unyielding willpower. There's still one last move. Yi Guqin stood up with difficulty and said, Yi Guqin wants to survive the last move? Many people were astonished when they heard Yi Guqin's words. Yi Guqin's sword had shattered. What could he use to fight Di Haotian? It's probably because of Su Jianshi. He's willing to throw away his life for a beauty. Some people sighed. No, it's enough. If this continues, you'll die. Su Jianshi hugged Yi Guqin tightly. Her eyes were red from the heart-wrenching pain. There's only one move left. Su Jianshi, let go of me. Yi Guqin broke free from Su Jianshi's embrace and left bloody footprints in his wake. He raised his blood-stained face and held the broken Xianming heavy sword in his hand. He pointed it at Di Haotian in the sky. The last move of the 3-move agreement. Di Haotian, come. Yi Guqin's blood-stained hair fluttered in the wind. He knew that Di Haotian would use all his strength for the last move. He knew that he would die after the last move. But Yi Guqin was still fearless. This was because he had promised Su Jianshi that he would be by her side and shield her from all the storms. For her. Not to mention Di Haotian, so what if he could kill a god? This was Yi Guqin's promise to Su Jianshi. He might not be able to kill a god with his current strength, but at least, he could stand in front of Su Jianshi. Silly boy, you're really silly. Too silly. Su Jianshi's eyes were hazy with tears as her heart trembled. In the sky, Sword Saint Donglio's projection said, Haotian, don't play anymore. Let's end this. After all, there were millions of cultivators present. Di Haotian had proposed the 3-move agreement in public. If Yi Guqin really survived, then Di Haotian would be in a difficult position. Was he really not going to take Su Jianshi's emperor's sword? That was impossible. But if that happened, Di Haotian's reputation of going back on his word would be bad. Di Haotian was a perfect person and shouldn't have such a blemish. I know what I'm doing. Di Haotian nodded. His long golden hair fluttered in the wind, looking like a golden river. A godlike aura emanated from his body. As the aura spread out, all the cultivators present felt a kind of suppression. It wasn't a suppression of cultivation, but a suppression of life as a 10th-grade sovereign. Di Haotian was a perfect person and was born to be superior to others. Everyone's expression changed when they felt this perfect aura. They knew that Di Haotian was going to use his true strength. Because if Yi Guqin survived this last move, then Di Haotian would be in a difficult position. Therefore, this move must be Di Haotian's ultimate move. Di Haotian is serious. Yi Guqin will definitely die with this move. Gu Xiaoyang said with certainty. Yi Songyue was also silent. She clearly thought so too. At this moment, all the disciples in the Sword Sect's Tower Forest were silent. No matter how much they believed in Yi Guqin, Di Haotian was too strong. Yi Guqin. Yan Wushuang bit her lip until it bled. She felt sad and sour in her heart. She was sad because of Yi Guqin's situation. She was sour because Yi Guqin was willing to give up everything for Su Jianshi, even his life. As for her, she could only watch silently from behind and feel sad. Yi Guqin. Princess Phoenix Dawn, Kempo, and the others were also watching at this moment. Duan Tianfeng sighed. He wanted to help, but he was powerless. No one thought that Yi Guqin would be able to survive this attack. My will is the will of heaven. This move tells you that heaven's will cannot be defied. Di Haoyan spoke like the voice of a deity. He slowly tapped his forehead with his finger. A powerful golden sword aura whizzed out and condensed into a golden sword shadow in the void. Heavenly Emperor Sword Art, Heavenly Emperor's Extremity, Heavenly God Slash. Di Haoyan pointed his finger downwards. That terrifying golden sword shadow seemed to be able to cut through the universe and slash towards Yi Guqin. Di Haoyan had used some of the power of the Heavenly Emperor sword for this move. No one could stop it. Facing this ultimate move, Yi Guqin remained calm. Su Jianshi, this is the last thing I can do for you. And Hongxue, I'm sorry. Yi Guqin held the broken sword in his hand and muttered in his heart. However, just as he was about to use all his strength to block Di Haoyan's attack, a slender and delicate figure once again blocked in front of him. She flew toward Di Haoyan's sword shadow. At the same time, she turned around and smiled brightly. I'm sorry, silly kid. You have to live on. Forget about me. Chapter 8:10. Yi Guqin's thoughts stopped at that moment. His eyes froze. This scene was so familiar. Boundless golden light radiated from her body, which was so slender that it made one's heart ache. At the same time, a shout resounded in all directions. Human Emperor Chapter, All Life Orders. An ancient golden sword appeared from Su Jianshi's body. Powerful and surging sword chi swept across the sky and earth. A golden emperor figure appeared in the void. Yi Guqin's thoughts seemed to have stopped. All that was left in his eyes was Su Jianshi's tearful smile. But this time, Su Jianshi didn't say anything to make Yi Guqin remember her. Instead, forget her. Su Jianshi was afraid that Yi Guqin would seek revenge from Di Haoyan. She didn't want Yi Guqin to be hurt because of her. So, she would rather have Yi Guqin forget her and live peacefully for the rest of his life. What kind of unforgettable love could make a young girl say something like "forget me" to a young man she adored? Su Jianshi. Yi Guqin found it difficult to calm down. A burst of vigorous aura spread out with a loud rumble. This time, it was Su Jianshi who stood in front of him with her life. Boom. Terrifying shockwaves spread out like ripples. Su Jianshi had completely released the power of the Human Emperor Sword and used the ultimate technique, All Life Orders. Countless figures clashed with Di Haoyan's Heavenly Emperorian Sword Art as the sword slashed out. Terrifying golden sword chi wreaked havoc in all directions. Everyone was shocked by this scene. At the last moment, Su Jianshi still made a move. Human Emperor Sword. Di Haoyan's silver eyes shot out an unprecedented light. Suppress. In the sky, Sword Saint Donglio's projection also reached out a hand. The Human Emperor Sword was something the Heavenly God Sword sect had to obtain. Although Elder Xinggu and the others were envious, they couldn't do anything with Sword Saint Donglu around. Is that the Human Emperor Sword? 1/3 of the 3 Emperor Saint swords. As Su Jianshi took out the Human Emperor Sword, everyone's eyes focused on the ancient golden sword. Su Jianshi was heavily injured by Di Haoyan's attack. Coupled with the fact that she had fully activated the Emperor's Sword, the terrifying backlash made Su Jianshi cough up blood. Her face was pale, and her snow-white skin was torn apart. Blood splattered everywhere. No! Yi Guqin wanted to help, but his body trembled and he spat out another mouthful of blood. His body was already at the end of its flight. Su Jianshi looked back at Yi Guqin with deep emotions. Although his physical body had collapsed, the corners of his blood-stained lips curled into the most brilliant smile in the world. Silly lad, to have met you, I have no regrets in my life. Next, the mortal Emperor Sword vibrated and released a dazzling light that engulfed Su Jianshi's body and sealed her within. The Golden Emperor silhouette also returned to the ancient golden sword. Under countless shocked gazes, golden light gathered on the surface of the mortal sovereign sword, condensing into golden crystal-like solids, sealing the entire mortal sovereign sword within. Di Haoyan reached out and snatched the mortal sovereign sword that was wrapped in the golden crystal. Finally got it. Di Haotian's indifferent face revealed a rare look of joy. Di Haotian had always wanted the mortal sovereign sword, and now his wish was finally fulfilled. Di Haotian frowned slightly. He had indeed obtained the mortal sovereign sword, but the mortal sovereign sword that was wrapped in the golden crystal had fallen silent. Di Haotian raised his hand and released sword qi. It landed on the golden crystal, but it couldn't leave a single mark. This is the mortal sovereign sword sealing itself? Di Haotian frowned. Some of the primordial swords with spirits could choose their own masters. If an unsuitable master forcefully suppressed it, the sword itself would seal itself. It wouldn't be able to use any power, as if it was in a deep slumber. It was clear that the Golden Emperor silhouette was the mortal sovereign sword spirit. However, the mortal sovereign sword spirit wasn't willing to be controlled by Di Haotian. That was why it had swallowed Su Jianshi's body and sealed itself. Do you dare to defy the will of the heavens? Di Haotian released the power of the Heavenly Emperor sword from his forehead and attacked the golden crystal. But it still couldn't break it. Di Haotian's face was frozen. Not only Di Haotian, but everyone else also didn't expect this to happen. The mortal sovereign sword automatically wrapped around Su Jianshi and sealed her along with the sword. In other words, even if Di Haotian obtained the mortal sovereign sword, he wouldn't be able to refine it. Haha, this is interesting. Di Haotian obtained the mortal sovereign sword with great difficulty, but he can't use it. Some people were secretly gloating. After all, Di Haotian was already very strong. If he could refine the mortal sovereign sword, he would be invincible among the younger generation. Even Gu Xiaoyang hated Yi Guqin, but he didn't want Di Haotian to refine the mortal sovereign sword. Haotian, don't worry. With the power of the Heavenly Emperor sword, the myriad sword king sword formation, the immortal fire, and the refinement of the primordial swords, the seal of the mortal sovereign sword will be broken in 3 years. At that time, you can refine both the sword and the person. Sword Saint Donglu suddenly said in the sky. The moment these words were spoken, everyone was shocked. They didn't expect the heavenly god sword sect to have such means. That's right. I was too impatient. It's just 2 or 3 years. Can't I wait? Di Haotian regained his composure. Give her back. A hoarse voice could be heard all of a sudden. Although the voice wasn't loud, it seemed to resound in everyone's ears. Di Haotian lowered his head slightly and looked down at Yi Guqin, who was covered in blood. Yi Guqin lowered his head slightly, his black hair covering his eyes. He didn't move, but his hoarse voice was incomparably cold and eerie. I said, give her back. A demonic aura gradually rose from the surface of Yi Guqin's body. The sky changed color and a fierce wind whistled. Everyone could feel a terrifying murderous intent emanating from Yi Guqin. It was as if the murderous intent was about to destroy the heavens. The clouds in the sky seemed to be dyed red by the murderous intent. Yi Guqin slowly raised his head. His eyes were as red as blood. Di Haotian, I'll give you one last chance. Give her back. Yi Guqin's hand holding the sword trembled, and then there was a cracking sound. The sword hilt was crushed by Yi Guqin. Is this the anger of a mortal? Di Haotian calmly put away the self-sealed Renhuang sword as he felt the killing intent that could engulf everything in its path. If that's the case, then, let's be buried together. Yi Guqin slowly took out a blood-red elixir. When they saw the blood-red elixir, the pupils of the millions of warriors suddenly shrank at the same time. That's the 9-death elixir. A knowledgeable martial artist suddenly let out an earth-shattering shriek. This 9-death elixir was the elixir that Yi Guqin had found in the origin ring left behind by the Dragon Abyss village chief. The 9-death elixir was a saint-grade elixir, and it only had one effect. At the cost of one's life, one would burn one's remaining strength and burst out with an unprecedented peak cultivation. When they saw Yi Guqin take out the elixir, everyone was dumbfounded. No, Yi Guqin. Yen Wushuang let out a shrill scream. After taking the 9-death elixir, there was no way to survive. Su Jianshi for you. I'll die 9 times without regrets. Yi Guqin murmured. Without hesitation, he swallowed the 9-death elixir. The moment he swallowed it, the world seemed to have gone silent. Everyone held their breaths, and time seemed to have frozen. Then, A terrifying aura that seemed to want to bury the universe erupted from Yi Guchen's body. Chapter 8:11. The wind and clouds rose, the mountains and rivers moved, and killing intent soared. The galaxy split, the firmament shattered, and a life-risking attack buried gods and demons. Hao Tian. Yi Guchen let out a long roar. It was as if his roar was going to shatter the mountains and rivers. The violent killing intent was like a volcano erupting. The terrifying aura was like a surging ocean. Yi Guchen swallowed the 9 deaths no regrets pill, and used his own life as the foundation to erupt with shocking waves. Terrifying sword intent swept out from Yi Guchen's body, causing the heavens and earth to shake. This scene was very similar to Feng Manla's life-risking move, Unique Sky Sword. A layer of blood-red flames burned on the surface of Yi Guchen's body. He was like a demon god in fire. His flesh, blood, true qi, and soul were all burning. The price he paid was an unprecedented power. Yi Guchen's aura rose steadily. He directly broke through the heaven and earth spiritual bridge. And then the first layer of the divine dwelling. The second layer of the divine dwelling. The third layer of the divine dwelling. The fourth layer of the divine dwelling. Finally, under everyone's shocked gazes, Yi Guchen's aura stopped at the 5th layer of the divine dwelling. From the life and death chamber to the 5th layer of the divine dwelling. Everyone's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Madness. Extreme madness. The eyes of the millions of cultivators were bloodshot. They had gone crazy. This was the first time they had seen someone so reckless. He swallowed the 9 deaths no regrets pill, and used his own life as the price to kill Di Haotian. This killing intent was enough to bury the heavens and destroy the earth, shocking everyone. No. Don't. Yen Wushuang was already sobbing. The stronger Yi Guchen was, the more his life would be squandered away. No matter what, Yi Guchen would not be able to survive. Consuming the 9 deaths no regrets pill meant certain death. This was the consensus of all cultivators. Senior Brother Yi. All the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest roared crazily, tears flowing from their eyes. Brother Yi. Kenpo was moved, his body trembling. Yi Guchen. Princess Fengxi sighed. She did not know why, but she felt very uncomfortable in her heart. You brat. Sigh. Duan Tianfeng let out a long sigh and clenched his fists tightly. What a powerful sword concept. Leng Qianhen exclaimed. That little bastard is finally dead. Xing Mo and the other false saints all had cold smiles on their faces. Although Yi Guchen wasn't dead yet, taking the 9 deaths without regrets pill was no different from being dead. It was only a matter of time. After he dies, I will retrieve the innate sword embryo from his body, Gu Xiaoyang murmured. Sigh. Yi Songyu sighed and didn't say anything. The 1 million cultivators present all had different reactions. However, most of the martial artists still looked at Yi Guchen with respect. Not everyone would have the courage to take the 9 deaths without regrets pill. You still want to resist? Pitiful ant. In the face of Yi Guchen, who was willing to risk his life, Di Haotian's expression remained indifferent. From his point of view, Yi Guchen's action was extremely stupid, and was cutting off his own path of survival. No one can defy the heavens because I, Di Haotian, am the heavens. No one can take away what I have. A golden longsword appeared between Di Haotian's eyebrows. This golden longsword was very similar to the human emperor's sword. However, compared to the human emperor's sword, this longsword seemed to have the aura of the heavens. There was an endless river of stars wrapped around the sword as if it was the 9 heavens. That's the heavenly emperor's sword. Di Haotian has taken out the heavenly emperor's sword. Everyone was shocked. No one had expected Di Haotian to use the heavenly emperor's sword. Heavenly emperor's sword art, heavenly unification, heavenly glory. Di Haotian slashed down with the heavenly emperor's sword. The dazzling sword radiance was like the light of the heavens as it emitted endless divine radiance. Thousands of terrifying golden rays of light gathered on the heavenly emperor's sword. When the sword slashed down, it was as if the heavens were passing judgment on the life and death of the ants. Feeling the terrifying power of the sword, everyone took a deep breath. No one in the divine dwelling stage would be able to withstand this attack. In other words, Di Haotian's heavenly unification was enough to kill any divine dwelling stage expert. Even an expert at the peak of the ninth heaven of the divine dwelling stage would have to die under this sword. It's over. Looks like Yi Guqian's efforts are useless. Even if he consumed the 9 deaths no regrets pill and fought with his life, he can't hurt Di Haotian. Yes, even the sword is broken. How can Yi Guqian fight with Di Haotian? Seeing Di Haotian's terrifying sword, everyone shook their heads. In the end, Yi Guqian's all-out strike was no match for Di Haotian's sword. However, in the face of this sword, Yi Guqian wasn't afraid at all. The words that Feng Manlu said when he used the heavenly sword echoed in his mind. In this world, there is nothing that the sword can't cut through. The brave are fearless, and the sword is invincible. An unparalleled sword will exuded from Yi Guqian's body. In the face of Di Haotian's sword, Yi Guqian wasn't afraid at all. There was only monstrous killing intent, and the belief to save Su Jianshi. At this moment, the world trembled and the heavens shook. All of Yi Guqian's means exploded. The Azura sword Dao exploded. The 5 elements sword intent exploded. The edgeless sword intent exploded. Man and sword as one exploded. The extreme Qi Si exploded to the limit. The chaotic knowledge Si crazily rotated. The ancient god heart violently beat. The terrifying will that sword from Yi Guqian's body shook the world. The 9th sword sex sequence insignia on the back of his hand also emitted a blazing light. The blood in his body also boiled, and 360 golden sword veins vaguely appeared. Rumble. High in the sky, the ancient sword that had been hanging since ancient times, the heavenly emperor, suddenly trembled a little. It was only a little. However, boundless sword Qi burst out from the celestial Dharch sword. This scene caused everyone's eyeballs to pop out. What did they see? Boundless sword Qi shot down from the celestial Dharch sword like rain. What's going on? Are my eyes playing tricks on me? The heavenly emperor sword actually trembled? Heavens! Did Yi Guqian's attack resonate with the heavenly emperor sword? That's the heavenly emperor sword. It's like the sun and the moon, shining over the south horizon region. How can it burst out a wisp of sword energy? At this moment, all the martial artists were so shocked that they didn't know what to do. Even Xing Emo, Elder Xinggu, and Dongfang Aoyang, the 3 false saints, were shocked. How is this possible? Sword Saint Donglu also let out a cry of surprise. This kid. Duan Tianfeng was also stunned. Solitary Cloud Sword Saint Lung Qianhen's eyes were fixed on Yi Guqian. This sword cultivator, who was just at the life and death threshold, actually resonated with the heavenly emperor sword. Everyone was shocked. Everyone went crazy. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Yi Guqian. Yi Guqian used his fingers as a sword and pointed at the sky. My sword sect Yi Guqian, today, I will sacrifice my life. With my blood as a guide, with my body as a sacrifice, I will borrow the sword from the heavens. Yi Guqian roared, and his roar shook the mountains and rivers for millions of miles. Borrowing the heavenly emperor sword from the 9 heavens. The heavenly emperor sword shook the entire South Horizon region. Chapter 8:12. Everyone went crazy, as if all the blood in their bodies was about to burn out. That was the Celestial Emperor. The ultimate weapon ranked 14th on the Immemorial Sword Records Heaven ranking. The Heaven ranking sword could not be forged by humans. Even the Ancient Sword Emperor and the Immemorial Divine Craftsman could only create and nurture the Earth ranking sword. The Heaven ranking sword used heaven and earth as a furnace, all things as copper, yin and yang as charcoal, and creation as the work. Don't look at how the Celestial Emperor sword was only ranked 14th. But one had to know that in the universe, there were only 36 heaven ranking swords. At this level, the ranking did not have much meaning. The gap between them was not particularly big. Even the 14th ranked Celestial Emperor would not have much of a difference with the top 10 heaven ranking swords. In the hearts of all the martial artists in the South Horizon region, the Celestial Emperor was an unshakable existence. Countless peerless experts had tried to seize the Celestial Emperor sword, but none of them succeeded. The celestial emperor sword was like the blazing sun and bright moon, illuminating the south horizon region. It had already become the source of all living things, an existence like faith. And today, now at this moment, this celestial emperor sword that hung in the sky of the south horizon region, unmoving since ancient times, for the first time it was shaken. It was indescribable, like the sun being destroyed and the stars sinking. Although with Yi Guqian's current strength, even if he burned himself and sacrificed his life, he could only borrow a trace of the celestial emperor sword's power. But just this trace of power seemed to be able to crush eternity. Endless sword energy burst out from the celestial emperor sword and fell down, under the shocked gazes of the crowd. The countless sword energy condensed into a sword of light that was tens of thousands of feet long. The sword of light seemed to be formed from the heavens and earth. It shot down explosively, destroying the clouds in the sky and stirring up the wind and clouds in the 9 heavens. Looking down on the world and shaking the mortal world. 10,000 miles of heavenly sword in the sky. Yi Guqian roared towards the sky, using his finger as a sword. He pointed straight at Di Haotian. The 10,000 miles of heavenly sword cut through the wind and clouds, sweeping away all enemies in the world with one sword. Di Haotian's indifferent expression changed for the first time. He never thought that Yi Guqian could trigger the resonance of the celestial emperor sword. He also did not expect that the celestial emperor sword that hung in the sky of the south horizon region would be inspired by Yi Guqian and turn into a sword of light. Di Haotian held the emperor sword in his hand and changed his sword stance, sweeping upwards. The golden sword light illuminated the sky as the imperial heaven returning sword collided with the sword light. However, boom. Di Haotian's attack was as weak as paper in front of the sword of light. Everyone who saw this scene was dumbfounded. Even the false saints and sword Saint Donglu were shocked to see this. Yi Guqian had only borrowed a sliver of the celestial Varch sword's power, and it was already so terrifying. The ultimate move that Di Haotian unleashed with the heavenly emperor sword was actually unable to block it at all. How is this possible? How can the celestial Varch sword be used by you? No one understands the heavens better than me. Di Haotian's expression changed. His golden hair danced in the wind like a golden river. An unprecedented divine light burst forth from his silver eyes, as if he wanted to pierce through the heavens and earth. He didn't believe it. He was the true dragon of clear sky, the mandate of heaven. How could he be defeated by this sword? The heavenly emperor has appeared. Di Haotian's voice gushed out, completely activating the power of the heavenly emperor sword. Endless golden sword radiance shot up into the sky, illuminating the entire universe. Outside the heavenly emperor sword, a 1,000-foot-long golden shadow appeared, standing tall in the darkness. Di Haotian, on the other hand, was in the middle of the golden shadow. He was like a dragon among men, with an aura of supremacy. That's the heavenly emperor's shadow. Everyone's eyes trembled. Even Sword Saint Donglu looked shocked. Di Haotian had dominated the younger generation of the Nantian region, and almost no one could make him use the heavenly emperor's shadow. However, at this moment, in order to resist Yi Guqian's move that sacrificed his life, Di Haotian had activated the heavenly emperor's shadow. Slash! Di Haotian's golden true chi surged as he raised the heavenly emperor sword in his hand. The heavenly emperor's shadow also raised the golden sacred sword at the same time. Following Di Haotian's movement, the sword slashed toward the sword of light. Heavenly Emperor Sword Art. Heavenly Supreme. Punishment of Heaven. The Heavenly Emperor Sword Art was the ultimate sword move hidden in the Heavenly Emperor Sword, just like the Human Sovereign chapter in the Human Sovereign Sword. As for the Heavenly Supreme, it was the trump card of the Heavenly Emperor Sword Art. When the sword slashed out, it was as if the Heavenly Emperor was punishing all living beings. The vibrations were 10 times stronger than the Heavenly Supreme unification from before. The Heavenly Emperor slashed at the Sword of Light. There was a loud explosion, the sky shook, and the spiritual chi was in a mess. The collision of true chi was like a huge wave that swept across the sky and the ground. Before everyone's shocked eyes, the golden sword radiance collided with the Sword of Light. They fought and destroyed each other. Then Kacha. The Sword of Light broke through Di Haotian's ultimate sword move again, and slashed down. However, that horrifying shockwave was greatly weakened by the Emperor Heaven Supreme's move. After all, with Yi Guqian's current strength, even if he sacrificed his life, he could only borrow a little of the Heavenly Emperor Sword's power. Even so, the sword aura of the weakened giant sword was still powerful. It pierced toward Di Haotian with an aura that could destroy everything. Innate Dragon Emperor's Qi. Di Haotian's face changed. He had not expected that the Heavenly Emperor's emergence, and the Heavenly Supreme would still be unable to resist the terrifying sword. Roar! On the surface of Di Haotian's body, the protective Dragon Emperor's Qi appeared again. The Golden Dragon Emperor's Qi condensed into the shadow of a coiling dragon, and it roared at the Sword of Light. Boom! The powerful vibrations of the collision burst out again. Everyone's eyes were pierced by the radiance, and they closed their eyes as tears flowed down. The blinding radiance flickered violently, and it gradually dimmed after more than 10 breaths. The millions of martial artists immediately looked over. Even Sword Saint Donglu, Elder Ancient Star, and the others were looking over. Gu Xiaoyang, Yi Songyue, and the others also stared at the dust cloud. A wind blew, blowing away the dust cloud. Di Haotian's figure was revealed in front of everyone. However, everyone's breathing almost stopped at the same time. Sword Saint Donglu was also extremely surprised. At this moment, Di Haotian, who was standing in the sky, was coughing up blood nonstop. His white robe was stained with blood, and a huge bloody hole appeared in his chest. Although it avoided the heart, the bloody hole had almost pierced through Di Haotian's body. Everyone could see the faint golden organs in his body. The Golden Dragon Emperor's Qi shadow could no longer maintain its dragon form, and it collapsed into a cloud of golden mist. Yi Guqian had used his life as the price to borrow the sword from the heavens to break Di Haotian's innate Dragon Emperor's Qi and severely injure him. How is this possible? Di Haotian's protective Dragon Emperor's Qi has been broken. He's been severely injured. Yi Guqian has seriously injured Di Haotian. After a short moment of shock, an earth-shattering uproar broke out. Di Haotian's miserable scene shocked everyone. Their eyes widened, and their scalps went numb. Chapter 8:13. What kind of existence was Di Haotian? The supreme son of the heavenly god sword sect. Young Master Haotian, one of the top 10 young masters. A 10th grade supreme genius with 3 special abilities. An elite of the sword faction. It was even rumored that he had the bloodline of one of the 100 races. Each of his identities could scare a group of people to death. But now, under everyone's gaze, they witnessed it with their own eyes. This supreme genius, whose name resounded throughout the South Sky region, Haotian Dragon, was severely injured by a low-level dynasty's life and death threshold genius. Who would believe this? Oh my god, what kind of existence is Yi Guqian? Heaven-defying, absolutely heaven-defying. He severely injured Di Haotian at the life and death threshold. The South Sky region will definitely be turned upside down, and all the geniuses will go crazy. Di Haotian, whom they look up to, was actually severely injured by a nobody, Yi Guqian. All the martial artists went crazy, and they couldn't wait to spread the news of what they saw today. This was incomparably explosive news, and no one would believe it. But in fact, even the million martial artists who witnessed it with their own eyes felt that it was unreal. It was too fake, like a dream. I'm injured? Di Haotian wiped the corner of his mouth with his hand and looked at the blood that was suffused with golden light, as if he didn't believe it. How long had it been since he was injured? He had forgotten what pain felt like. But now, a heart-wrenching pain came from his empty chest. Di Haotian had yet to recover from his shock. In the entire South Sky region, there were very few people of the same generation who could compete with him. Most of the geniuses who fought with him couldn't even break through his protective Dragon Emperor Qi. Therefore Di Haotian had not tasted injury for a long time. Not to mention such a serious injury. Yi Guqian, you injured me? Di Haotian finally recovered from his shock. His usually indifferent expression suddenly surged with a murderous intent that could change the color of heaven and earth. Who was he? He was destined to be the Haotian True Dragon. Injuring him was going against heaven's will, against heaven's will. In the end, I still can't kill you? Yi Guqian's broken body stood on the ground with a cold smile on his face. he still couldn't save Su Jianshi. Di Haotian was too strong. Even at the cost of his life, he could only severely injure Di Haotian, but could not kill him. Di Haotian had too many trump cards. In fact, if Di Haotian had not been so conceited and arrogant, Yi Guqin could have hurt him, but it would not have been so serious. In the end, it was because Di Haotian had viewed Yi Guqin as an ant and underestimated him that he suffered such a heavy blow. "Haotian, are you alright?" asked Sword Saint Donglu, looking at Di Haotian. Di Haotian was the core prodigy of the Heavenly God Sword sect. If there were no accidents in the future, he would become the next sect master of the Heavenly God Sword sect. If something were to happen to Di Haotian, it would be an irreparable loss. "It's fine." Di Haotian's eyes were cold. The surrounding martial artists were in an uproar. The news of Yi Guqin borrowing the sword from the heavens and severely injuring Di Haotian would definitely spread throughout the entire South Sky region. Since ancient times, there were very few people who could cause the celestial Varch sword to move. Yi Guqin is really shocking. Even Yi Tsungyue, who had a cold personality, could not help but have a strange look in her eyes. Among the younger generation of the South Sky region, no one could injure Di Haotian like that. Yi Guqin was the only one. What's there to talk about when he's already dead? Gu Xiaoyang's eyes twitched when he saw Yi Tsungyue's expression. "It's a pity." Yi Tsungyue shook her head. After consuming the 9 deaths no regrets elixir, there was no way anyone could survive. While the rest of the spectators were shocked, they also thought of the same point and shook their heads with a sigh. If Yi Guqin did not die, he might be able to fight against Di Haotian in the future. Is it really over? Princess Feng, she was disappointed and frustrated, feeling a sense of loss. Sigh, the heavens are jealous of geniuses. Kimpo let out a long sigh. Although Yi Guqin was going to die, his last move, borrowing the sword from the heavens, was enough to leave his name in history and be passed down in the South Sky region. Yi Guqin. Yin Wushuang covered her face with her hands as she cried silently. The eyes of Jiling, Chu Qingqi, Yi Xie and the other disciples of the sword sect also turned red. The eldest senior brother in their hearts, the dignified sword master of his generation, had finally perished. Cough cough. Yi Guqin could not hold on any longer and knelt on the ground on one knee. He felt a life-devouring power spread out from his body. It was the power of the 9 deaths no regrets elixir. This life-devouring power spread throughout Yi Guqin's body. It would devour all of his true qi, flesh, blood and even soul power. This was the price Yi Guqin had to pay for using his peak cultivation, his life. This life-devouring power could not be stopped. No pills or sacred herbs could make up for it. This power would not stop until Yi Guqin's life was completely devoured. This was the reason why the 9 deaths no regrets elixir would kill anyone who consumed it. Yi Guqin can't hold on any longer. After all, consuming the 9 deaths no regrets elixir should be his limit. Seeing the exhausted Yi Guqin coughing up blood, all the cultivators were filled with emotion. Although you'll definitely die, offending me is the same as offending the heavens. I'll bestow upon you heavenly punishment. Di Haotian raised his hand again. The Emperor's sword let out an earth-shaking cry as if it felt its master's anger. Although Di Haotian was not in a good state, he still had the ability to attack. Yi Guqin did not have any strength to resist. Even if Di Haotian did not attack, Yi Guqin would die. Just as Di Haotian's sword was about to fall, the demon fetus, which had been floating in the sky, suddenly trembled violently. Perhaps it was because Yi Guqin had activated the power of the Celestial Emperor sword. The demon fetus in the center of the demon fetus finally reacted after being stimulated by the power of the Celestial Emperor sword. Billowing demon qi burst out from the demon fetus. Everyone's eyes turned to look at the devil egg. Sword Saint Donglu, Elder Ancient Star, and the other false saints also turned their attention to the demon fetus. They came here to explore the existence of the primordial famed sword. Yi Guqin was just an ant that jumped out halfway, and he would definitely die now. Therefore these big shots no longer paid attention to Yi Guqin. Di Haotian's hand also paused slightly. This was because he felt that the Emperor sword was emitting waves of fear. What is inside? Di Haotian's silver pupils moved as if he wanted to see through the demon fetus. Suddenly, the demon fetus burst out with shocking demon chi. An arrogant roar shook the heavens and the earth. The eternal demon, the heaven-defying master, the incarnation of calamity, slaughtering all living things. Who is it? Everyone, including the false saints and saints like Wen Donglu, were shocked by the arrogant tone of his words. They felt an extremely terrifying soul pressure burst out from the demon fetus. In the midst of a thunderous roar, the ground shook and roared. The demon fetus shattered. Monstrous demon chi surged out, surging to the heavens and the earth. A pitch-black demon sword appeared out of nowhere. The pitch-black sword light swept across, swallowing everything in the world. The demon chi surged, sweeping up the dust and surging into the sky. The light cast by the celestial emperor sword dimmed a lot, as if covered with a layer of dust. The demon sword crossed the sky. The celestial emperor covered the dust. The primordial demon sword finally appeared. Chapter 8:14. The martial artists present were still immersed in the shock of Yi Guqian borrowing a sword from the heavens just now. But no one would have thought that the devil egg that had been brewing all along would actually break out of the cocoon at this moment. And what rushed out of that devil egg was shockingly an immemorial devil sword. That devil sword was pitch black all over. It was not the ordinary kind of black, but the kind of ink black that seemed to swallow all light. The devil sword's shape was slightly sinister with spikes, carrying a kind of savage aura. The sword body spread with endless devil patterns, and even carved with bright red blood grooves. The most peculiar thing was the sword guard's hand guard, shaped like an open beast's mouth. Inside was actually a cluster of pitch-black vortices, like a black hole, swallowing all things. The moment this devil sword came into being, it stirred up endless winds and clouds. Fiendish energy surged into the firmament, as if wanting to contend with the celestial emperor. Immemorial famed swords, the power was vast. If two famed swords collided together, they would instinctively contend with each other. That's the immemorial devil sword. At this moment, even the indifferent sword Saint Donglu could no longer maintain his calm. That was an immemorial famed sword. An existence that even transcending saints would be envious when seeing it. That's right, it's the immemorial famed sword records Earth leaderboard ranked 34th, Devil Sword God Devouring. Elder Xinggu's expression was agitated, simply about to roar. How long had it been since the South Horizon region had an immemorial famed sword appeared? There was no need to talk about the Heaven Leaderboard's famed swords. Forget about the South Horizon region. Even looking at the 9 regions, Heaven Leaderboard's famed swords were also extremely rare. Even some Overlord-class forces in the South Horizon region only possessed Earth Leaderboard famed swords. And now, in front of their eyes, an Earth Leaderboard famed sword appeared alive. Who would not be agitated? That's an immemorial famed sword? Heavens, I can actually see an immemorial famed sword in my lifetime. The surrounding million martial artists also virtually went crazy. Heaven Leaderboard 36, Earth Leaderboard 72, a total of 108 immemorial famed swords, shaking heaven and earth, passed down from ancient times. All the martial artists did not expect that they could see an immemorial famed sword with their own eyes in this lifetime. Devil Sword God Devouring, recorded in the immemorial famed Masters Records Earth Leaderboard, was an immemorial divine craftsman, six-fingered devil, Gui Wuchang, a devil sword forged from an entire immemorial Taotai fierce beast, possessing the horrifying power to swallow heaven and earth. Everyone's eyes turned red, especially the big shots from the Overlord forces. Their eyes were bloodshot from staring at the scene before them. As expected, is it that devil sword? On the ground, Yi Guqian, who only had a wisp of his aura left, looked at the demon sword devouring god and muttered in his heart. This demonic sword was indeed the same one he had seen in the memories of the heaven-devouring beast core, creating an ancient famed sword, and imparting the heaven-devouring secret technique. As for the blurry figure in his memories, he killed the Taotai and forged the demon sword. Most likely he was none other than the six-fingered demon craftsman Gui Wuchang. Just like the 9 heavens god casting in Xianyuan Juding, who forged the 3 emperors' sacred sword, They were both divine craftsmen from the immemorial era. What a pity. Yi Guqian knelt on one knee. He was not far from death. To be able to see an ancient famed sword before he died, it could be considered as fulfilling one of his wishes. Even if it was only the immemorial demon sword ranked 34th on the Earth ranking, the power of the god-devouring sword was incomparably vast. The terrifying pitch-black sword Qi soared into the sky, its aura shocking. Attack. At this moment, Elder Xinggu and the others could not wait any longer. Didn't they come here to search for the traces of the ancient famed sword? Now that the ancient famed sword was right in front of them, how could they not fight for it? One Donglio's illusory figure snorted coldly and stretched out his hand to grab the god-devouring sword. However, at this moment, beside the god-devouring demon sword, demonic qi rumbled and a skinny old man in a black robe suddenly appeared. His eyes were as deep and dark as a black hole, exuding a bone-chilling evil aura. How dare you snatch my sword? How dare you? This old man was the one that Yi Guqian and the others had seen in the ancient demon city. He was the one who claimed to be the sword spirit of the ancient famed sword. However, how could Yi Guqian not know that this old man was not the sword spirit of the ancient famed sword? There was an 80% chance that he was the existence that was sealed in the ancient demon city. You are. Although Elder Xinggu and the others could not recognize the black-eyed old man's identity, they still felt their scalps go numb in the face of this old man with the strength of a false saint. It was hard to imagine that this black-eyed old man, who had been sealed in the ancient demon city for such a long time, still had the strength that even false saints were afraid of. This showed how strong his original strength was. On the other hand, when Donglu, a martial saint expert, froze when he saw the black-eyed old man. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly lost his voice and said, "Could you be the one from the dark world?" "Ah, I didn't expect that after so long, there would still be people who remember me. I'm the Demon Sword Emperor, Jitian." The black-eyed old man let out a long roar, and an incomparably vigorous soul energy surged out. Although he was still in the primordial spirit state, the energy wave spread out in all directions, shocking everyone. What? He's the Demon Sword Emperor, Jitian? The supreme demon Dao expert who once dominated the dark world? Elder Xinggu, Xingemo, and Dongfang Aoyang, the three false saints, were extremely shocked. They didn't expect that the skinny black-eyed old man in front of them was Jitian. The Demon Sword Emperor, Jitian, was one of the top experts in the dark world. He had once caused a boundless massacre in the Nantian region. Even the heavenly tribulation saints of the overlord forces couldn't stop him, and they were even killed. However, in the end, Jitian mysteriously disappeared. However, they didn't expect him to be sealed in this place. Haha, I didn't expect so many people to gather here. Today, I'll let these millions of people help me reconstruct my physical body. Jitian smiled eerily, and the god-devourer sword beside him vibrated. An endless devouring demonic qi burst out in all directions. It turned into thousands of pitch-black sword rays, and they rushed in all directions, toward all the martial artists. Puchi. When those pitch-black sword rays touched those martial artists, regardless of their cultivation level, they instantly exploded into a cloud of blood mist. The blood mist gathered in the fleshly demon fetus. Retreat, retreat quickly. The millions of martial artists felt their hair stand on end, and they hurriedly retreated. However, countless people still died in an instant. Let's retreat. Yan Chang'e led Ta Lin and the others to retreat. A shrill cry was heard. It was Zi Donglai from the Ziyao dynasty. He was hit by a pitch-black sword ray, and his body instantly exploded into a cloud of blood mist. At the same time, the innate purple qi in his body was also taken away. I told you that if you go against the bet, you will suffer retribution. On the other side, Kempo saw that Zidonglai had died, and his lips curled into a cold smile. However, he didn't dare to stay any longer. In just an instant, more than 300,000 of the millions of martial artists in the Tianhuang Plain had died. This was the might of the Demon Sword Emperor, Jitian, who was once the #1 demon of all time. And you guys, your flesh and blood is far superior to those martial artists. Jitian turned to Elder Xinggu and the others, and he reached out his hand to grab them. His terrifying soul power turned into a boundless giant hand. Retreat! Elder Xinggu and the others were scared out of their wits, and they hurriedly retreated. However, Xingmo was caught by the giant soul hand. No! Xingmo let out a furious roar, and he unleashed all of his strength as a false sage. However, Pucci, in front of Jitian, he still couldn't resist. Even though Jitian was only a primordial spirit now, he still killed a false sage casually. An even more vigorous essence surged into the flesh devil fetus. The flesh devil fetus that was as large as an island also began to wriggle violently, shrinking slowly. However, the smaller it became, the more vigorous the power of the flesh devil fetus was. And you guys? Jitian reached out his hand again, and he grabbed at Elder Xinggu and the others. Damn it! Elder Xinggu was so frightened that his face turned pale. Even a false sage like him would have such a feeling, as if he was an ant that could be easily crushed by others. However, at this moment, in the void, there was a burst of brilliance, and a powerful fluctuation appeared again. A river of stars appeared in the sky, accompanied by the arrival of a projection. Demon Sword Emperor, Jitian, if you were in your peak state, no one would dare to provoke you. However, you are only a primordial spirit, and you dare to be so fierce. Aren't you too presumptuous? A figure wrapped in endless starlight stepped out of the void. It's the 7-star Lord. Elder Xinggu revealed a surprised expression. Chapter 8:15. What? The 7th Astral Lord. The 7th Astral Lord is here too? He's a saint of the Starry Sword Pavilion. The cultivators who had fled far away looked at the demonic sword emperor, Jitian, with fear lingering in their hearts. Killing over 300,000 cultivators with a wave of his hand. How terrifying was his strength. However, with the arrival of the 7th Astral Lord, these cultivators calmed down a little. The 7th Astral Lord was also a famous saint of the Starry Sword Pavilion. However, that wasn't all. On the other side of the sky, another projection appeared, wrapped in endless divine light. Hee. It really is the immemorial demonic sword. Hearing this voice, the patriarch of the Dongfang family's side branch, Dongfang Aoyang's expression froze. It's you, Dongfang Haoyu. What? Dongfang Haoyu, a saint of the Dongfang family's main branch. Another saint's projection has arrived. Oh my god. Everyone was shocked by this, including one Donglu from the Heavenly God Sword sect. All 3 overlord forces had saints' projections appear. You're just a projection. What can you do to me? The demonic sword emperor, Jitian, didn't have the slightest fear in his black hole-like eyes. To others, a saint of the heavenly tribulation was high and mighty. However, in Jitian's eyes he was just SOSO. If he was at his peak, he wouldn't even care about the 7th Astral Lord, Dongfang Haoyu, and the others. Jitian, you've been sealed for so long and your physical body has been destroyed. How dare you be so fierce with just your Yuan spirit? Dongfang Haoyu's tone was cold. Everyone, I don't think now is the time for internal strife. Let's kill Jitian first and then discuss who the God Devourer sword belongs to. What do you think? The 7th Astral Lord said. Sure. Dongfang Haoyu and Sword Saint Donglu nodded. As saints, their temperament had long passed the point of being impulsive. The most important thing now was to kill Jitian. Only then would they be able to obtain the God Devourer sword. Kill. The 3 saints' projections attacked at the same time. Their power was earth-shattering. Every move they made destroyed the clouds. Just 3 juniors. Even if I'm just a Yuan spirit, I can kill you all with a single hand. Jitian roared at the sky and fought the 3 saints' projections. As for the God-devouring demonic sword, it continued to condense a flesh and blood devil embryo. The flesh and blood devil fetus continued to shrink until it turned into a human-shaped ball of flesh and blood. Vaguely, an extremely powerful fluctuation was emitted from it. Kill Jitian as soon as possible. We can't let him reconstruct his body. The 7th Star Lord said loudly. Eternal Sun Palm. Dongfang Haoyu's palm pressed down like an exploding sun. Eastern Flow Sword Art. Sword slaughter the 9 heavens. One Donglu's sword light exploded, sweeping across the 9 heavens. Extreme transformation of stars, heavenly slash. The 7th star lord raised his hand, and a 1,000-foot-long sword of stars appeared, slashing down at Jitian. The 3 saint projections no longer held back, and completely unleashed their trump cards. Haha, come at me. When have I ever been afraid of anyone? 13 demonic swords, demonic slaughter. Jitian also executed his ultimate move. The void was destroyed and the devil sword chi swept across the universe. The intense collision shook the sky, startling all the cultivators in the periphery. But to everyone's surprise, even when the 3 saint projections joined forces, they were still unable to suppress Jitian. Although the 3 sages were only projections, Jitian was only in his primordial spirit form. His current strength was probably less than 1/10 of his peak state. But even if it was less than 1/10 of his strength, it was still enough to fight against the 3 saint projections. What kind of terrifying strength was that? After another 15 minutes, the god-devouring demonic sword finally formed a body from the flesh and blood devil fetus. The body was well-proportioned and slender, containing an unparalleled terrifying strength. After all, it was the god-devouring demonic sword that had absorbed an endless amount of flesh and blood essence to form the pure demonic body. Haha, the body is finally formed. I shall reappear in the world and unleash the blood calamity of all living beings. Seeing this, Jitian laughed out loud, and was about to enter the pure demonic body. At the same time, in a mortal city in the Saint Origin dynasty, a middle-aged man in coarse clothes was walking among the crowd with his hands behind his back. His face was extremely ordinary, and he was the kind that could not be found in a crowd. But what was shocking was that no one in the surroundings seemed to be able to see him. This ordinary-looking middle-aged man was clearly walking in the middle of the crowd, but no one around him noticed his existence. This ordinary-looking man was looking in the direction of the Tianhuang Plains with a faint light in his eyes. If little Fatty was here, he would definitely scream out in shock. Because this middle-aged man was his master, Xingtiani. It's about time. My disciple, your destiny has arrived. This world has already decayed and the calamity has arisen. It needs to change the world and change it. The middle-aged man, Xingtiani, slowly rose into the sky, but no one in the surroundings noticed him. High up in the sky, Xingtiani raised one hand and formed a hand seal. Demonic Sword Emperor, Jitian, do you really think that the sword sect did not leave any means to deal with you? Xingtiani muttered to himself. Just as he was about to make a hand seal, Yi Zichen's eyes lit up. On the Tianhuang Plains, little Fatty's face suddenly froze. When the demonic sword god Devourer appeared, little Fatty had been standing there in a daze as if he had lost his soul. At this moment, boundless pitch-black sword chi suddenly surged out from his body. A terrifying sword essence that wanted to devour everything spread out from his body. This sudden scene caused everyone to be stupefied. This Yi Guchen, who was lying in a pool of blood and was about to die, also raised his head with difficulty and looked at little Fatty, whose aura had suddenly changed. Little Fatty was stunned. After the seal in his body was broken, countless memories came flooding in. In an instant, he understood everything. So I am actually... Little Fatty muttered to himself as if he did not dare to believe it. A huge illusory image of a ferocious beast appeared on the surface of his body. It stood tall like a primordial demon mountain, and released a terrifying aura. This is... Yi Guchen's pupils contracted. In the sky, Jitian and the 3 saints' projections, who were fighting, also felt the terrifying aura. How is this possible? Jitian's pitch-black eyes were filled with surprise. Not only them, even Elder Xinggu, Dongfang Ao Yang, and the remaining hundreds of thousands of martial artists who were hiding further away were shocked by the illusory image of the huge ferocious beast. That is, the primordial ferocious beast, Tao Tai. A martial artist exclaimed. Everyone was in disbelief as they looked at the little Fatty with extreme shock. How could little Fatty, who had always been by Yi Guchen's side, manifest the illusory image of Tao Tai? If they had to say, there was only one possibility. Little Fatty was in a daze as he picked up the sword on his waist. The sword was called Wuzhen, and it was given to him by his master, Xing Tianyi. Little Fatty used to treat it as a joke to tease others, but in the end, Wuzhen sword. Ha! I am really a fucking sword. Little Fatty roared and cursed at the sky. Chapter 8:16. As the seal in Little Fatty's body was removed, he regained all of his memories. To be precise, he wasn't a sword, but a sword spirit. He was the sword spirit of the immemorial demon sword, God Devourer, Tao Tai. When the six-fingered demon had forged ghost impermanence to forge God Devourer, he had refined the soul of Tao Tai into the sword spirit. Later, when Ren Pingxing had destroyed Jitian's body and suppressed his primordial spirit, Ren Pingxing had destroyed his primordial spirit. In order to ensure that his primordial spirit wouldn't be destroyed, Jitian had forced the sword spirit of God Devourer out, and replaced it with his primordial spirit, nurturing it in God Devourer. At the same time, he had relied on God Devourer's unique demonic chi to devour countless living beings to prepare for the reconstruction of his physical body. The sword spirit of Tao Tai that had been expelled was obtained by Xing Tianyi, who had sealed it and turned it into Little Fatty. Xing Tianyi knew that the demon sword monarch wouldn't give up and would make a comeback. Therefore, he had prepared Little Fatty as a backup. And now, Xing Tianyi had finally revealed his trump card. Yi Guqin understood everything in an instant. Why did Little Fatty have such a terrifying sword intent in his body, and why it was sealed? Why Little Fatty could devour metals? Why Little Fatty wasn't affected by the demonic chi and the demonic fetus in Eternal Demon City? It was because he was the sword spirit of God Devourer, the soul of Tao Tai. So that's how it is. Yi Guqin had been coughing up blood. He had consumed almost all of the healing pills in his origin ring. All of the pills in the bronze cauldron had also been consumed. All of Yi Guqin's quasi-sage herbs and various treasures had also been refined. However, he still couldn't stop the life-devouring power from spreading in his body. His life was now like a candle in the wind. Little Fatty, who had awakened all of his memories, looked at Yi Guqin, who was lying in a pool of blood, and his small eyes flashed. Disciple, go. Complete your destiny and become the sword spirit of God Devourer again. Complete your master's task. A voice sounded in Little Fatty's mind. Yes, master. Little Fatty's expression changed. It was Xing Tianyi's voice. Fatty didn't hesitate any longer. He looked at Yi Guqin and then transmitted a message. Brother Yi, I only have the few of you as my friends. Even if I become the God Devourer sword spirit again, and lose all my memories and my identity as a Little Fatty, I will still think of a way to save you. After saying that, Little Fatty's body soared into the sky. Under everyone's shocked gazes, he truly transformed into the heaven-devouring exotic beast, Tao Tai. Like an ancient demonic mountain, the strange beast threw its head back and roared. Its bloody mouth seemed to be able to swallow the sun, the moon, and the stars. The Taotia's soul that Little Fatty had transformed into entered the God-devouring spirit. In that instant, the God-devouring sword broke free from Jitian's control. Damn it! How is this possible? Why is the God-devourer sword spirit here? Jitian roared furiously as his aura turned berserk. After so many years of refining, Jitian had almost refined the God-devourer into his personal sword. However, the Taotia's soul took back control of the God-devouring beast in an instant. Not only that, the God-devouring sword, under the control of the soul of Tao Tai, wanted to swallow the pure demon body that was formed by the demon fetus. Suppress it. Seeing that, Jitian's face changed. He activated his soul power and wanted to seize the pure demon body. Good chance. Hold him back. Seeing that, the seventh Star Master and the rest took action again to hold Jitian back. You all deserve to die for disobeying me. In the blink of an eye, Jitian shot out a shocking sword aura that pierced through the void. The seventh Star Master and the other two were pushed back at the same time. Jitian grabbed at the pure demon body, but he only managed to grab half of it. The other half was swallowed by the God-devouring sword. However, that was not the only shocking thing. After the God-devouring sword swallowed half of the pure demon body, it turned around and pierced through the void towards the Celestial Emperor sword in the sky. What's going on? Many of the martial artists in the distance were shocked. After the god-devouring sword broke free from Ji Tian's control, it charged towards the celestial emperor sword in the sky. Little fatty Yi Guqian, who was lying in a pool of blood, turned pale. Although the god-devouring demonic sword was very powerful and was ranked 34th on the Earth leaderboard, it was still very powerful. However, compared to the Heavenly Emperor, who was ranked 14th on the Heaven leaderboard, he was still a far cry. If the god-devouring sword were to attack the Heavenly Emperor sword, the only outcome would be that it would be severely injured. Damn it! Come back here! Ji Tian roared as he raised his hand to grab the Devourer God. If he were to lose the immemorial demon sword, God Devourer, Ji Tian's strength would drop by a lot. After all, the immemorial famed sword still gave him a huge boost to his combat strength. To a sage, it was an absolute killing weapon. Unfortunately, Ji Tian could not stop the god-devouring sword. Boom! A terrifying explosion sounded from the 9 heavens. It was the god-devouring sword that charged towards the Heavenly Emperor sword. The celestial emperor sword that was suspended in the 9 heavens for eternity began to shake. Just as the celestial emperor sword was shaking, Xing Tianyi, who was somewhere in the void in the Saint Origin dynasty, smiled faintly. I was originally a mortal in this world. Once I draw my sword, I will change the world. This decaying world will be changed by this sect. Xing Tianyi soared into the sky and reached out his hand to grab the Heavenly Emperor sword. Rumble! At this moment, all the martial artists in the South Horizon region raised their heads and were shocked to see this. A terrifying giant hand that covered the sky with a boundless aura was grabbing at the Celestial Emperor sword in the 9 heavens. How is this possible? Is someone trying to seize the Celestial Emperor sword? Hundreds of millions of martial artists in the South Horizon region exclaimed at this moment. How many years had it been since someone dared to touch the Celestial Emperor sword? At the end of the South Horizon region, there was a mountain. It was unknown how tall, how big, and how wide it was. An ancient voice came from the mountain. A variable has appeared in the sword faction. On the other side of the South Horizon region, in a mysterious spatial crack world, where the Supreme Immortal Valley was located, an outstanding immortal shadow was wrapped in a hazy immortal light. This immortal shadow was Situ Hongshue's master, the master of the Supreme Immortal Valley, the master of the Immortal Valley. 8th generation sword faction. Do you really want to risk universal condemnation? The sword protector has become a robber. Your actions will bring about the destruction of the sword faction in the South Horizon region. The people of the other 8 factions won't sit by and do nothing. Countless experts in the South Horizon region were shocked because of this. The Celestial Emperor sword seemed to have sensed something. It vibrated and burst out with endless sword chi. On one hand, it fought against the God Devourer sword. On the other hand, it fought against the giant hand. There was a loud explosion. The God Devourer sword fell from the 9 heavens. The sword trembled, and its aura fell by a lot. However, what was shocking was that although the giant hand didn't get its wish to seize the Celestial Emperor sword, it took away part of the Celestial Emperor sword's power. The light of the Celestial Emperor sword dimmed by half in an instant. In other words, the owner of the giant hand took away half of the Celestial Emperor sword's vast power. The light of the entire South Horizon region was dimmed by half. This caused all the experts to be horrified. The owner of that gigantic hand was so powerful that there was no limit to its strength. Even the 7th Star Lord, Sword Saint Donglu, and the other saints on the Tianhuang Plain were slightly shocked. His terrifying strength made the Heavenly Tribulation saints feel extremely oppressed. However, as the giant hand withdrew, the Celestial Emperor sword stabilized again. The 7th Star Lord and the others focused their attention on the God Devourer sword that fell from the 9 heavens. The God Devourer sword had suffered some damage in the collision with the Celestial Emperor sword. However, it was still a primordial demon sword, and its power was still formidable. The 7th Star Lord, Dongfang Haoyu, Sword Saint Donglu, and Demon Sword Emperor Jitian reached out to grab the God Devourer sword almost at the same time. However, to everyone's surprise, the God Devourer, which had fallen from the sky, suddenly shook its sword and charged towards Yi Guqian, who was on the ground. Chapter 8:17. No one had expected this turn of events. The immemorial demon sword had taken the initiative to attack a person. And this person was not a peerless expert, but Yi Guqin, who was on the verge of death. Di Haotian's eyes were filled with curiosity as he watched the god-devouring demon sword charge towards Yi Guqin. He stretched out his hand to grab the god-devouring demon sword. However, the god-devouring demon sword suddenly jerked and emitted a pitch-black sword light that swept towards Di Haotian. Di Haotian's expression changed as he drew out the emperor sword to block it. With a loud boom, Di Haotian was pushed back 100 feet. His originally injured body spurted out blood again. The immemorial demon sword was extremely powerful. Even if it was damaged, it was not something a divine dwelling expert could touch. Even if the divine dwelling expert was Di Haotian, he would not be able to touch it. In just a few breaths, the god-devouring demon sword turned into a ray of black light and entered Yi Guqin's body. Not to mention the others, even Yi Guqin himself was stunned. However, on second thought he somewhat understood. After Little Fatty turned into the soul of Taodai and the spirit of the god-devouring demon sword, his memories would be erased and he would gradually become a pure sword spirit. However, it was obviously impossible to erase all his memories in such a short period of time. In addition to Little Fatty's will, the god-devouring demon sword spirit was closer to Yi Guqin. Therefore, after the god-devouring demon sword left Ji Tian's control, it would naturally fall into Yi Guqin's hands. Come back! Ji Tian's Yuan spirit immediately charged towards Yi Guqin. The god-devouring demon sword was already in his bag. How could he let it escape? Even if the god-devouring demon sword had its own sword spirit, Ji Tian could still forcefully suppress it after he reconstructed his physical body. In the face of Ji Tian's palm attack, Yi Guqin did not have the slightest ability to resist. Just the strong wind pressure alone was enough to make Yi Guqin's bones crack, as if they were about to shatter. Just when everyone thought that Yi Guqin would be smashed into a meat patty by Ji Tian, something in Yi Guqin's origin ring suddenly began to vibrate. This is... Yi Guqin was stunned. A ball of misty green light spread out from the origin ring. Following this, a scroll appeared and spread out, protecting Yi Guqin's figure. When Ji Tian's powerful palm landed on the scroll, a loud boom was heard. However, it didn't hurt Yi Guqin at all. This is the painting of the Green Lotus of Reincarnation. Yi Guqin was extremely astonished. This painting was exactly what Yi Guqin had obtained from the top floor of the Sword Sect Pagoda, and it was the painting of the Green Lotus of Reincarnation left behind by the 6th generation Sword Sect master, Ren Pingsheng. Originally, Yi Guqin thought that the painting of the Green Lotus of Reincarnation was only used to cultivate the Reincarnation Sword Lotus. From the looks of it now, it was definitely not that simple. At the very least, after sensing Ji Tian's aura, the Reincarnation Green Lotus portrait appeared automatically. Ji Tian's expression turned solemn when he saw this. Soon after, his pitch-black eyes were filled with a fury and hatred that could devour everything. This is... Ren Pingsheng. You are a member of the Sword Sect. Ji Tian looked at Yi Guqin. His pair of black hole-like eyes seemed to want to devour Yi Guqin. Ji Tian didn't expect that Yi Guqin would have something that Ren Pingsheng had left behind on him. At this moment, the painting of the Green Lotus of Reincarnation suddenly emitted a misty green light. Within the green light, an illusory figure appeared. Green light surged around his body and his appearance couldn't be seen clearly. A bamboo cane and straw shoes are lighter than a horse. Ren Pingsheng is covered in misty rain. A carefree voice was heard from the illusory figure. This voice was something that Ji Tian would never forget. It was the 6th generation Sword Sect master who had suppressed him, Ren Pingsheng. Ji Tian, do you think that I didn't have any backup plans? Even though you, the Demon Sword Emperor, have dominated the world, I will suppress you again today. Within the green light, Ren Pingsheng's illusory figure spoke. The entire painting of the Green Lotus of Reincarnation suddenly burst into flames. Then, in the Sword Sect forest, in the Sword Whisper mountain range, the Sword Sect pagoda that had been standing tall and filled with an ancient aura suddenly trembled. Then, it rose from the ground and charged towards the infinite plains. Ren Pingsheng, are you still going to suppress me? Ji Tian roared into the sky. Sword chi surged, and was about to destroy Ren Pingxing's illusory figure. However, at this moment, the sword sect pagoda in the sky was filled with an ancient aura. It was like an ancient divine mountain that suppressed Ji Tian. The sword sect pagoda was left behind by Ren Pingxing to suppress Ji Tian. How? How is this possible? I am unwilling to accept this. Ji Tian unleashed all of his strength. His primordial spirit seemed to be on the verge of burning. Terrifying shockwaves swept across the world. The surrounding space shattered, revealing pitch-black cracks in space. The ground trembled and endless cracks spread out. This terrifying shockwave caused the Seventh Star Lord and the others to retreat temporarily. This was because if they were too close, their sage projections would be shattered. Rumble. The sword sect pagoda in the sky spun on its own. Boundless divine radiance burst out and suppressed Ji Tian. No matter how Ji Tian struggled and shattered the void, he couldn't break free from the suppression of the sword sect pagoda. Boom. Finally, the sword sect pagoda suppressed Ji Tian's primordial spirit completely. However, no one noticed it at this moment. Just as the sword sect pagoda landed on the ground and destroyed Ji Tian's primordial spirit, a faint soul fluctuation escaped from Ji Tian's primordial spirit. This fluctuation was too faint. Moreover, it was completely separated from Ji Tian's primordial spirit. Therefore, the sword sect pagoda didn't detect this soul fluctuation. This soul fluctuation was guided into the void. No one noticed it, and it quietly merged with a blood-stained and dead figure. That figure was Feng Manlu, whose vitality was almost gone. However, no one in the outside world noticed it. It's over. The demon has been suppressed. It's finally over. Gosh, hundreds of thousands of people died just like that. Those martial artists who had escaped far away were relieved. There were originally 1 million martial artists present. With one move, Ji Tian had killed over 300,000 people. He could be said to be a super demon. It was no wonder that he had once caused a bloodbath in the South Horizon region. Even ordinary saints weren't a match for him. The Demon Sword Emperor died just like that? Dongfeng Haoyu was still in disbelief. He should be dead. I didn't expect this. Is this the means of the sword sect? Sword Saint Donglu sighed. The sword sect had been passed down in the South Horizon region for countless years. It had a long history, and was even older than some overlord class forces. The sword sect had only one successor, and didn't have much power. However, every generation of the sword sect master was a peerless expert selected from thousands of sequences. Every single one of them was an overlord. Even overlord class forces weren't willing to offend the sword sect master. Even the Demon Sword Emperor, Ji Tian, who possessed monstrous ferocious might and unparalleled power, was killed by the backup plan left behind by the 6th generation sword master in front of everyone's eyes. Who wouldn't be afraid of the sword sect master's means? However, at this moment, as Ji Tian's primordial spirit was destroyed, the atmosphere of the entire Tianhuang plain suddenly quieted down, and became a little strange. In the sky, the 7th Star Lord, Dongfeng Haoyu, and Wen Donglu almost immediately separated and looked at Yi Guqin, who was lying in a pool of blood. Previously, everyone had seen that the demonic sword-devouring god had entered Yi Guqin's body. There was no hesitation. The 3 saint projections reached out to grab Yi Guqin at the same time. Chapter 8:18. Yi Guqin was already at the end of his tether, and was on the verge of death. Not to mention the 3 saints' projections. Any warrior in the life and death realm could easily end Yi Guqin's life. Therefore, Yi Guqin couldn't resist the attacks of the 3 saints, and could only lie in a pool of blood. He didn't even have the ability to move. Even if he took all the elixirs and sage-to-be pills in his origin ring, they couldn't heal his injuries. Even the ancient god blood, which was full of life essence, could only delay Yi Guqin's life by a little. It couldn't save him from death. It's over. All the martial artists sighed in their hearts when they saw this scene. Since the ancient demon city was destroyed, Yi Guqin, who was only in the life and death realm, had been refreshing everyone's understanding of him. Whether it was using the Eye of the Void, taking back the Khanate sword embryo, or severely injuring Gu Xiaoyang, or taking the 9 deaths no regrets elixir, burning his life, borrowing a sword from the heavens, and severely injuring Di Haotian. In the eyes of the people present, things that were almost impossible to achieve were turned into reality by Yi Guqin. Who would have thought that Yi Guqin could severely injure 2 of the top 10 young masters of the South Sky region by himself? Not to mention the various forces behind Yi Guqin. The terrifying chaotic world demonic ape, his peerlessly graceful master, Feng Manlu, Shui, who possessed the heavens whale phenomenon, and the fake Saint Shui Yiqing behind her, and even the southern refined Saint Wen Tianfeng, were all his masters. Who would have thought that a little genius from a low-level dynasty would have such amazing forces behind him? But unfortunately, no matter how many miracles Yi Guqin could create, he was already dead. In the hands of the 3 saints, he was just a fish waiting to be slaughtered. It's finally over. When Yi Guqin dies, I can take back the Khanate sword embryo, Gu Xiaoyang sneered. In the distance, the remaining 600,000 to 700,000 warriors also focused their eyes, wanting to see the end of this chaos. Which overlord would the ancient demon sword god-devouring sword fall into? Yi Guqin. Yan Wushuang covered her red lips as tears streamed down her cheeks. She could not imagine what kind of pain that proud and unyielding youth was going through at this moment. What made Yan Wushuang's heart hurt even more was that she could only stand there and watch, and was unable to help him. The other disciples of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest were also trembling. The 3 saints all reached out to grab Yi Guqin. Right now, only the 3 of them had the ability to fight for the demon sword. Even Elder Xinggu and Dongfang Aoyang, the 2 false saints, were unable to join the battle. Looking at the 3 saints who were descending from the sky, Yi Zichen thought to himself. Yi Guqin, who was lying in a pool of blood, curled his lips into an unprecedentedly cold smile. Strength. Only with great power could one dominate everything. Yi Guqin now had the strength to sweep through the younger generation. However, he was still far from being able to compare with the powerhouses who stood at the peak of the South Horizon region. If I can survive, there will be a day when I will make all of you pay with your blood. Yi Guqin's pupils were tinged with blood red. The God-Devourer sword, which had entered Yi Guqin's body, seemed to emit a demonic aura that infected Yi Guqin. After all, the God-Devourer sword was a demon sword, a ferocious sword with a demonic nature. It was not a sword of a gentleman. This would also affect Yi Guqin, causing his pitch-black eyes to be filled with a demonic charm. Boom. The 3 saints' giant hands pressed down on Yi Guqin's body at the same time. The ground crumbled, and smoke and dust filled the sky. Hundreds of thousands of gazes gathered at this moment. Was Yi Guqin finally dead? Just as everyone was thinking this, a strange look appeared in the eyes of the 3 saints. Rumble. A terrifying wave of energy rippled out from the smoke and dust, causing the surrounding ground to crack. It was not the power of true qi, but soul power. Boom. There was another explosion, and a vigorous soul power rippled out in all directions, scattering the smoke and dust. Under everyone's astonished gazes, an illusory figure blocked in front of Yi Guqin. The pupils of all the martial artists present froze at this moment, and their expressions froze at this moment. Yi Guqin still had a trump card? Not to mention them, even Elder Xinggu and the other false saints were shocked. The various powers behind Yi Guqin had already surprised them. Now there were even more complications? Everyone's gazes were uniformly cast on the illusory figure standing in front of Yi Guqin. The figure was a man in green. He had a handsome face, and there was a supreme majesty between his brows. Although his figure was illusory, at this moment, he was like a pillar that supported the sky. It gave people a sense of security that even if the sky collapsed, he would still shoulder it on his shoulders. It's the primordial spirit body again. Some martial artists exclaimed. Previously, the demon sword emperor Jitian had the primordial spirit body. No one expected that Yi Guqin was hiding a peerless expert with the primordial spirit body. Even Yi Guqin himself was surprised at this moment. This figure was naturally Su Qingyu's primordial spirit in the soul-accumulating coffin. The once youngest heavenly tribulation saint of the Su clan appeared again after a long silence in the soul-accumulating coffin. It's you, Su Qingyu. Your primordial spirit hasn't been annihilated? In the sky, Sword Saint Donglio's eyes were filled with extreme surprise. Back then, the Heavenly God Sword sect had joined forces with other forces to besiege the Su clan. Therefore, Wen Donglu of the Heavenly God Sword sect had some understanding of Su Qingyu's situation. At that time, although Su Qingyu was powerful, he was still young. In the end, the Heavenly God Sword sect's sect master had destroyed his physical body, leaving behind a severely injured primordial spirit to escape. Everyone thought that Su Qingyu's primordial spirit had been annihilated long ago. However, they did not expect to see Su Qingyu's primordial spirit again at this moment. I, Su Qingyu, am not willing to be annihilated until I see the destruction of the Heavenly God Sword sect with my own eyes. Although Su Qingyu was now in the primordial spirit body, he stood with his hands behind his back and his aura was majestic. As soon as he finished speaking, a majestic killing intent swept across the sky, causing the wind and clouds to change color. What? He's Su Qingyu, the genius saint of the Su clan, the youngest heavenly tribulation saint. All the martial artists present were stunned. Su Qingyu had long been a legend to them. Moreover, they had heard that he had been killed by the Heavenly God Sword sect's sect master in the battle between the Heavenly God Sword sect and the Su clan. Unexpectedly, he appeared again at this moment. The two of you, kill this person first. With him here, we can't get the God Devourer. Wen Donglu said. Originally, with the state of Su Qingyu's primordial spirit body, Wen Donglu and the others did not take them seriously. However, they were only projections, and their strength was not much stronger than the primordial spirit body. All of you will pay the price for what you have done today. The heavenly Tao is reincarnation. Su Qingyu's voice was mighty as he raised his hand. An extremely terrifying spiritual power surged out, and caused the space in front of him to slightly distort. Oh no! Attack! Su Qingyu is trying to escape. Seeing this, Wen Donglu suddenly said. The seven-star lord and Dongfang Haoyu also reacted. They did not hesitate at all and attacked directly. Powerful waves of energy rushed towards Su Qingyu. Su Qingyu frowned slightly. He was nourished by Yi Guqin's chaos soul power, and the waves of energy from the saint's attack just now had awakened him from the soul-accumulating coffin. Even so, Su Qingyu's strength was extremely limited at this moment. After all, Yi Guqin's chaos soul power was just a drop in the bucket for his primordial spirit body. Su Qingyu raised his other hand, and a translucent soul power surged out, resisting the three saints' attacks. There was a loud bang and ripples burst out. Su Qingyu's primordial spirit body, which was already illusory, became even more transparent. His other hand was still reaching into the void, and he released what little soul power he had left, distorting the space. Everyone, one more time. He can't hold on. Sword Saint Donglu said loudly. The three saints attacked again. Open! Su Qingyu shouted in a low voice, and his soul power surged out. With a crack, the space in front of him was directly distorted and shattered by Su Qingyu's powerful soul power, revealing a pitch-black space crack. Little guy go, Su Qingyu frowned, and his soul power wrapped around Yi Guqin's body. Then he escaped into the space crack. On the other side, the divine condor hurriedly grabbed the unconscious Blackie and rushed toward Yi Guqin, entering the space crack together with him. Do you think you can escape? How could the three saints allow Su Qingyu to take Yi Guqin away? They attacked again, and Su Qingyu turned around to block. With a loud bang, the space crack began to become unstable and showed signs of collapsing. Su Qingyu's primordial spirit became transparent again. Apparently, he had been severely injured. Su Qingyu can't hold on anymore. Last move. Seeing this, the three saints attacked directly. They wanted to shatter the space crack along with Yi Guqin's primordial spirit. Then, Yi Guqin and the God Devourer sword would not be able to escape. Su Qingyu frowned. Just as he was about to collapse his body for the last time, all of a sudden somewhere else, the void suddenly shattered. A snow-white and slender hand, as if it had broken through billions of layers of space, broke through the air from a very distant place. It collided with the moves of the three saints, and a loud boom shook the heavens and the earth. Who is it? The three saints were shocked. Even Su Qingyu was surprised. He looked at Yi Guqin and said, "It seems that you have someone protecting you. That hand is..." The extremely weak Yi Guqin's eyes suddenly focused when he saw the jade-like hand that had broken through the space. At the same time, within the shattered space, a clear and cold voice came from afar. "Starry Sword Pavilion, Celestial Sword Sect, Dongfeng family. Very well, you dare to kill Chen. If there is a chance in the future, I will definitely pay a visit to your sects." This voice. It's Aunt Xuansu, Yi Guqin said in surprise. Chapter 819. Yi Guqin's aunt, Xuansu, had parted ways with Yi Guqin in the Divine Origin Dynasty's Milky Way prefecture. They had never seen each other again. Xuansu had once told him that when Yi Guqin truly grew up and became famous in the Nantian domain, she would come back to him and tell him some secrets, including Yi Guqin's father. However, Yi Guqin did not expect Xuansu to make a move at this moment. Moreover, Xuansu's strength was far beyond Yi Guqin's imagination. She was able to break through the endless space and block the attacks of the three saints' projections. This meant that Xuansu was at least at the level of a heavenly tribulation saint. So powerful. Someone is helping Yi Guqin again. Could it be another saint? Oh my god. What is Yi Guqin's background? He even has a saint backing him. Is this the background of a genius from a low-level dynasty? Everyone's faces were filled with astonishment as their scalps went numb. There were too many forces behind Yi Guqin. Now there was a saint helping Yi Guqin escape from a distant place. Senior brother Yi, who is he? All the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest were stunned. Only now did they realize that their understanding of Yi Guqin was still too shallow. Yi Guqin's background was definitely not that simple. After Xuansu made a move and blocked the attacks of the three saints, Su Qingyu led Yi Guqin, the Divine Eagle, and Blackie into the spatial rift safely. Yi Guqin glanced at the three saints. He glanced at Elder Xinggu and the others. He also glanced at Di Haotian, Gu Xiaoyang and the others. His face was unprecedentedly cold. Heavenly God Sword Sect, Starry Sword Pavilion, Dongfeng family, just you wait. If I don't die, I will definitely flatten all of you in the future and... Yi Guqin turned to Di Haotian. When he saw the Renhuang sword in Di Haotian's hand, which was wrapped in a golden crystal, there was a hint of pain in his eyes, but it was immediately drowned out by a bone-chilling coldness. Di Haotian, if I don't die, I will kill you no matter where I go. That furious roar, like that of an Azura from hell, resounded through the world. Rumble. Above the firmament, there was the sound of thunder exploding, as if the heavenly Tao had made an oath. As Yi Guqin spoke, his figure disappeared into the depths of the spatial crack. After that, the pitch-black spatial rift slowly closed. The entire place was deathly silent. Not a single sound could be heard. Yi Guqin actually escaped. Many people were in a daze. In such a hopeless situation, Yi Guqin was actually able to escape. So what if he escaped? That Yi Guqin took the 9 deaths without regrets pill. It's only a matter of time before he dies. Some warriors shook their heads and sighed. Indeed, many people nodded. After taking the 9 deaths without regrets pill, there was no doubt that one would die without a doubt. Damn it! Even the projections of the three saints could not remain calm. Their faces gloomy. They were not angry at Yi Guqin for escaping. Yi Guqin was definitely going to die. What they were angry about was that Yi Guqin had escaped with the God Devourer sword. That was the primordial demon sword. Even if it was damaged in the collision with the Celestial Emperor sword, it could still be nourished and recovered. Who are you? How dare you obstruct the 3 overlords? The 7th star lord of the Starry Universe Sword Pavilion turned to another spatial crack. It was from this crack that a jade-like hand had reached out and blocked their attack. Otherwise, Su Qingyu and Yi Guqin would not have been able to escape. So what if you're an overlord? You reap what you sow. What you did today will be the source of your destruction in the future. A clear and cold voice rang out from the distant void. Huh. Then I'll see who can destroy my heavenly god sword sect. Sword Saint Donglu laughed in anger. An overlord force had stood firm in the South Horizon region for thousands of years. It was not something that Yi Guqin, who was destined to die, could destroy. The crack in the void slowly closed. The entire heavenly wasteland plains, which was in tatters, fell completely silent. Find the God Devourer, even if you have to turn the entire South Horizon region upside down. The seventh Star Lord shouted coldly. Dongfang Haoyu and Wen Donglu also gave the order. Although Yi Guqin was definitely going to die, the God Devourer sword had left with him. They had to find it. Yes. Elder Xinggu and the others did not dare to delay and hurriedly sent the message. Not to mention the three overlords. In a few days, the entire South Horizon region would be in an uproar. All the overlords would want to find Yi Guqin's body and seize the primordial demon sword. Kill me? Not to mention that you're definitely going to die. Even if you can survive, what can you do to me? When I return to the sect, I'll definitely break the seal of the human sovereign sword in 3 years at most. At that time, I'll refine both the sword and the person. How many people in the younger generation of the South Horizon region can be my match? Di Haoyan stood in the void with a cold expression. The wound on his chest had begun to heal. As a 10th grade supreme talent, his recovery ability was extremely strong. Although he had suffered a great loss at the hands of Yi Guqin, and his reputation had been damaged. At least, Di Haoyan had finally obtained the human sovereign sword. On the other hand, Gu Xiaoyang's expression was extremely ugly. Now that Yi Guqin had escaped, it would be extremely difficult to get the Khanate sword embryo back. Gu Xiaoyang could not help but look at Yi Tsangyue. Fairy Tsangyue then. Gu Xiaoyang hesitated. You don't have to say anything. Gu Xiaoyang, you and I are not meant to be. Yi Tsangyue did not say much. She was not in a good mood because the Khanate sword embryo was lost. Her wish to merge with the Khanate indestructible sword embryo had been shattered. Gu Xiaoyang looked as if he had swallowed a fly. This time, not only had he been severely injured by Yi Guqin, but he had also lost the Khanate sword embryo. It was impossible for him to dual cultivate with Yi Tsangyue. He had suffered a double loss. Yi Guqin is despicable. Gu Xiaoyang clenched his fists tightly, the veins on his temples throbbing. After losing the Khanate sword embryo, his strength would be greatly reduced. It was uncertain whether he could keep his position as one of the top 10 young masters. I have to go back to the sword pavilion and cultivate in seclusion. When the next battlefield of talents opens, I must become stronger to keep my position as one of the top 10 young masters. Gu Xiaoyang thought to himself with a ghastly expression. Humph the three forces. Very well. I won't let this matter rest after forcing my disciple to death. Duan Tianfeng glanced coldly at the 7th Star Lord and the others, then left with Sword Saint Guyun and the others. The three saints glanced at Duan Tianfeng and frowned slightly, but they did not take action. No matter how poor Duan Tianfeng was now, he used to be a self-forging saint. Many experts were indebted to him. If they killed Duan Tianfeng, it would cause a lot of trouble. Sigh. Kenpo, Princess Fengxi, and the others sighed softly. Everyone in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was silent. Let's bury all the corpses in the building first. Yen Chang's voice trembled slightly when he said this. However, it's gone. Master Feng Manla's body is gone. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.